This program is brought to you by the Genesis Communications Network, a world leader in talk radio since 1998. Visit GCNlive.com today.
You're in the Paracast, the gold standard of paranormal radio. And now, here's Gene Steinberg.
I have to thank Chris O'Brien for pointing me in this direction, because we normally get lots of letters from publicists, book publishers suggesting, hey, we've got a book and we've got a guest, and wouldn't you like to have that particular guest? And in this case, it's a gentleman named of Gary Lachman, and Chris looked at that name and says, you get him on the show. Because Chris, of course, is a rock and roller, and so is Gary. Chris, why don't you explain?
Well, first of all, you know, as many of our listeners already know, I was in New York during the wild and woolly 70s and 80s, and lived downtown for a number of years in Manhattan, and was, there when a lot of real historic events, I mean, seeing Talking Heads with 30 people at Max's, or seeing the Police roadie their own gear at CBGB's, and seeing early shows with Blondie, where Gary was actually the original bass player before going off for other pursuits and being replaced by, I think it was Nigel Harrison, wasn't it? Correct me if I'm wrong. But I also used to share a rehearsal space with Chris and Debbie and Jimmy and Clem and the guys. Later on, this would have been after they had already had their hit with Parallel Lines, but in, I think, 81, 82, for a short while, it wasn't very long, a few months, we would set up and do our thing before they would come in. And I remember sharing a few moments with them. Of course, I did get to know Chris and Debbie a little bit through mutual friends, and it, as Gary will attest, it was a real magical time in New York City. It was a real expansive, extremely inspiring time in the arts, and especially in music. And there were a lot of clubs and great bands that would come over from England. Hardly anybody knew, so you get, small crowds and get a chance to interact with people. And I think Gary will also agree that you really had to have your A game going to keep up with the nightlife there. It was extremely fast-paced, to put it mildly. You really had to be a professional to be able to kind of have that lifestyle and be able to show up and know your parts and not mess up, and, put on good performances. So we kind of have that thing to share. I think I met you at a party, some studio opening party at one point. I remember we were introduced. But back then, I mean, gosh, the parties were daily, nightly, and just living that life was quite a kaleidoscope and a whirlwind of people, places, events. How long were you in New York, Gary? You mentioned earlier, before we went on the air, you're from Bayonne, New Jersey, which of course was right across the river, the Hudson, from the west side of New York City. How long were you actually there?
Well, I just want to say one thing. When I left Blondie, they got another bass player, but they didn't replace me. In any case, I started hanging out in New York in, say, around late 73, 74, because we used to just go over, on the PATH trains and just go hang out down in the Village. And then when I became aware of people like David Bowie and Lou Reed and that, friends and I, we read that they were hanging out in this club, this place called Club 82. That's not there anymore. That was on East 4th Street, sort of between 2nd and 3rd Avenue. This was an old drag, like transvestite kind of club that started letting rock bands play. And into the New York Dolls at this time, and they would play there. And the word was that Bowie and Lou Reed were hanging out at this place a lot. So a couple of friends and I were determined to meet them. So we used to go to this place practically every night. And it was from being in that milieu that I wound up living in New York not long after. And I started out, I really wasn't a musician. I wrote poetry. It was pretty bad. I'm glad none of it has survived. But I was kind of hanging out with kind of real musicians in New Jersey and picking up little bits and pieces. The drummer from Blondie was another fellow from Bayonne, New Jersey, Clem Burke. When their bass player quit, this is in the very, very early stages when Blondie, before it became Blondie, they were going through all different kinds of different transformations and trying to get something going. And at one point, Clem started playing with them, Debbie and Chris. And then their bass player at the time quit to join Television, because Television's bass player Richard Hell left to do his own band called the Heartbreakers with Johnny Thunders from the New York Dolls. I had been hanging out a lot, and he said, "I want you to come down and an audition." So I could, kind of sort of almost maybe play. And I looked the part. I was really skinny because I was starving. Because at the time I was working as a messenger in New York and just making enough money, barely to pay my little bit of the rent where I was living. And I had dark glasses, which I wore all the time. And that was enough. So I started playing with them in, say, around April of 75. And then we did, the first time we played CBGB was during this Festival of Unsigned New York Talent. It wasn't called punk yet. And this was early summer of 75. And I was there for, quite some time. I had my own band after I left Blondie. I had a band called The No for a while. And we played in New York and LA. And my last kind of hurrah with rock, more or less, was when I played with Iggy Pop for 2 North American tours.
Oh, no kidding. Wow, that was
1981, yeah.
That must have been a trip.
Yeah, that was the Sex, Drugs, and Rock and Roll tour. And by the end of it, or the end of both of them, I'd had quite enough of all 3, as it were. And I kind of hung my Fender Stratocaster up on the wall for a while. And it wasn't until many, many years later, in the late 90s, 96, 97, when I actually was first started living here in London, that I wound up doing some Blondie gigs again. This is at the beginning of their sort of reunion.
Yeah, their comeback, sure.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I did some shows with them in New York and then these big festivals across the States, but it all sort of went south once again. For your readers' edification, I write about all of this in a book of mine called New York Rocker, which is about my memoir, my time playing in Blondie.
Well, speaking of your writing, you've written many, many books, and I do have a couple of them. One of my favorite books, really, about a often sort of underreported and I think sensationalized when you do hear about the occult and rock and roll, that it really hasn't been a subject that very many people have been willing to tackle. And your book, Turn Off Your Mind, I think is if not the preeminent book about the subject. It's definitely in the top, the top ranking of books covering this subject. There have been a number of books that cover the subject, but I think your book in particular gives a sober, well-informed look at the influence of what you could loosely call the occult and how it has been a kind of a burbling underneath the surface all through the history of rock and roll. And what initially attracted you to the occult? Give us a little background on your interest in the occult sciences and in that particular subject.
Well, I got interested in the occult and pretty much everything else that I've been writing about for a long time. While I was playing in Blondie, I was living on the Bowery with Debbie, Harry, and Chris Stein in a illegal loft space, which I think it's still standing, but I saw somewhere recently on Facebook or somewhere like that it was slated to be demolished and another, absolutely overpriced restaurant or hotel was going to be put up there. But when I was living there, there was still this kind of leftover kind of cultural debris from the previous generation. So there were books about the occult and, psychedelics and Castaneda and Timothy Leary and Tibetan Book of the Dead and things like that. But then also in this loft space, Chris and Debbie had a kind of kitschy, kind of fun interest in it. And they decorated the place with weird things like voodoo things and sort of, upside down crosses and pentagrams and candles and stuff like that.
Okay, Gary Lachman is here with Gene and Chris. You're in
The Paracast.
The award-winning graphic converter, the universal genius for photo editing on your Mac. Join over 1.5 million loyal users for this Swiss Army knife photo editing app. It gives you all you expect from a top-flight image editing app with tons of features, and most important, it's easy to use. Get 20% off from lemkesoft.de/Gene. That's lemkesoft.de/Gene. Do you need a website? Well, you can get a great deal on hosting services with Namecheap's legendary coupon code. They're offering substantial hosting discounts on shared hosting, business hosting, VPS hosting, reseller hosting, and even dedicated servers. Namecheap is preferred by millions. It's backed by a money-back guarantee. Use the coupon code LEGENDARY to cash in on the special deal at Namecheap.com, Namecheap.com.
Have you ever thought you'd like to flip houses but didn't know how or where to get the money? Are you ready to be your own boss so you can start living the good life? Hi, I'm Preston Neely. I used to be so broke. I had my electricity turned off 9 times, but I figured out a way to quit my job and find financial freedom in real estate. For a limited time, I want to send you a free copy of my smash hit selling book, How to Get Rich in Real Estate. It shows you how to copy exactly what I did so you can make money from the comfort of your own home without even doing any manual labor. I've already given away 5,000 books and they're going fast. To get one before they're gone, call 1-800-958-9256. Listen, if you're sick and tired of stressing about money, this book could change your life. It's short, fun to read, easy to understand, and awesome. To find out how to get your free book while supplies last, call 1-800-958-9256. Call 1-800-958-9256. 1-800-958-9256.
Fully cooked, ready-to-eat bacon. I'm talking thick, meaty, center-cut presidential bacon. Savory and delicious. I buy some, I use some, I store some. Awesome. No refrigeration needed with a 10-year shelf life. NASA-packed technology. Bacon. Fully cooked, fully hydrated, ready to eat right from the packed bacon. Or warm and served. Life-saving, ready-to-eat bacon. 10-year shelf life bacon. Ships free at fullycookedbacon.com. Fullycookedbacon.com.
What would your life be like if you woke up each morning with new vitality, feeling better than you have in years, and you noticed a difference in your sleeping patterns, blood sugar levels, and had a sense of well-being overall? There's something that is changing thousands of people's lives, and you could be one of them. It's called Heart and Body Extract. Sharon Harris, co-creator of Heart and Body Extract, talks about the positive effects of Heart and Body Extract.
What happens with the formula Heart and Body Extract is it's giving the body the necessary vitamins, minerals, amino acids, enzymes, and phytonutrients so the body will heal itself. And yes, the body does have the ability to balance blood pressure, balance cholesterol, clean and unclog the arteries. It can also work on balancing the circulation for diabetics. So the body is an amazing thing. It simply needs some help so it has the tools to heal itself.
Heart and Body Extract gets results. To order your 2-month supply, call now, toll free at 866-295-5305. Order online at hbextract.com.
Looking for that edge during those intimate moments? We see many ads for enhancement, but the side effects include death. At GCN Team, we should change the Healthy Body, Brain, and Heart Pack to the Healthy Libido Pack. The brain and heart are not the only organs that require a healthy vascular system. For proper blood flow at the right moment, go to GCNteam.com or call 877-878-4203. That's 877-878-4203. That's 877-878-4203.
We'd like to hear from you. If you have a comment or question about the Paracast, send it to news@theparacast.com. That's news@theparacast.com. And don't forget to visit our famous Paracast community forums at forum.theparacast.com.
So from good old rock and roll, punk rock to the occult, we're talking to Gary Lachman, and he's got a new book out. And he's got a number of books if you check his site and also Amazon. The current one is Beyond the Robot. I want to tell you about something else we've got. We've got, after the Paracast, our exclusive podcast, which is available only to members of the Paracast Plus, and to be able to download each weekly episode and get a commercial-free version of this show, join the Paracast Plus at plus.theparacast.com, plus.theparacast.com. So Gary's talking about his early days of hanging out with Debbie Harry and the people from Blondie and living in this loft illegally. Of course, now there are a lot of homes in New York that, whether legal or not, you can't afford them. But I assume here, did they actually have to pay rent to live in this place or what?
Well, we paid rent, but it was sort of like someone had got hold of this space and was not really supposed to rent out the other floors and was doing that. And then somehow we got the electricity tapped into this liquor store that was downstairs. So they were paying our electricity bill. It was things like that. I was going to say this fellow who sort of had the place, he himself was interested in the occult, and he was a great fan of Aleister Crowley, who was this fantastically flamboyant dark magician in Britain in the early 20th century. And he would do these impromptu readings with his tarot cards and things like that. And so I gradually got interested in this stuff because it was there. I was kind of in the atmosphere. One book that I picked up at the time was simply called The Occult. And it was by this British writer named Colin Wilson. Whom as you mentioned, my most recent book, Beyond the Robot, The Life and Work of Colin Wilson, is a biography of. And as I said, I hadn't any interest in it. I was always reading. I read tons of stuff all the time, or, the Beats and existentialists and all this kind of stuff. But what I liked about his book is that, first of all, the writing, the narrative was so good. The writing style was so good. I didn't want to put it down. And then he was talking about all of this interesting stuff about different states of consciousness and hidden powers and, all that kind of thing. But it was in the context of this kind of philosophy, this kind of context of, well, I later realized it was in the context of what was known as existential philosophy, which he had written about already and all that. But I was just 19 picking this book up, and it was like, wow, this is, I was just bowled over by it. And that's how I got interested in it. So I started out sort of a naive enthusiast, and I just ran out and started reading all the books about this I could get. And this was a time in 75 when there was a lot of stuff that was available and it was cheap. There were a lot of classic occult texts that would be reprinted in these kind of cheap editions, and they were all on the remainder tables in places like Barnes & Noble and all like that. So I just wound up just more and more reading about it. And I got a reputation for carrying, all these books around with me when I went on tour. And stuff like that. And when, other guys are out, having a wild time, I'd be back in the hotel, digging through, the stack of books I had.
Right. I wonder how they reacted to that, because you always think of rock and rollers going out and drinking and smoking and sniffing and everything and having wacky times and basically almost getting away from it all, because if you're on something, it's hard to take attention to real world. And you're sitting there, you're the bookworm. Did they make fun of you for that?
Sometimes. But I think at one point when things started to get a bit acrimonious between Chris, Debbie, and myself, I think they were worried that I was going to cast spells on them, something like that.
Oh.
Right. So that was almost a good, the best offense is a good defense. So just carry around some books that might shake people's belief systems a little bit, and that might alleviate some problems.
When things got difficult, start speaking some spells, even gibberish spells under your breath, so they'd kind of walk away.
Start toning Enochian chants in a deep guttural voice. That generally does the trick.
Absolutely. But I was going to say, at least there was one very good thing for myself and Blondie as a whole came out of all this, was that a song I wrote, I'm Always Touched by Your Presence, Dear, became a big hit in the UK and in Europe. It wasn't a hit in the States, but over this side of the Atlantic it was. And this was a song about the telepathic and strange kind of dream experiences my girlfriend at the time and I were having. We discovered that while I was on tour, we just found out that we were sort of having the same kinds of dreams, or we would call each other at the same time, and all this sort of stuff that actually it's not that unusual among couples. There's a lot of evidence and a lot of stories that show that there is this kind of telepathic connection. But it was something that, because I was reading about this stuff, and so was my girlfriend at the time, and we were just becoming, hey, this is actually real. And so I wrote that song about it. So something very good came out of it, and instead of just sort of paranoia about my my casting spells.
This may be an emotional question that you don't want to answer, but having left Blondie before Parallel Lines, do you ever feel kind of like Pete Best and the Beatles?
You're not the first to say that. Not really. Not really, to be absolutely candid and honest. I mean, at the time, I wanted to have my own band. And so that was the main driving thing. And then later on, okay, yeah, sometimes you felt like, well, God, I could have maybe used that money or so on and so on. But no, because I actually had to say it, my sensibilities had changed. And so by the time that I saw that they were becoming, huge, which was like sort of the early 80s, I was gradually moving out of playing music anyway, because I was doing so much reading. It was just difficult for me to... One thing happened, I couldn't write songs. I wrote lots of songs. That's the one thing, if I have any regrets about that time, was that there's quite a few very good songs of mine, if I have to say so myself, that didn't get an airing. A few that did, I'm grateful for, but there's a clutch of some that didn't get out there. But no, not really. I mean, in fact, this was something that what I did after leaving Blondie and then leaving my rock and roll in general, I went back to university and I got a degree in philosophy. I remember my philosophy teacher saying to me, "You gave up rock and roll to come here and study this."
Yeah,
they couldn't conceive of it. They couldn't conceive of it.
It's almost like oil and water.
But is it really? Because I think a lot of people, rock and rollers, are interested in the occult to some degree. Maybe they don't pursue it as deeply as you have.
Well, the occult is one thing, Gene. Philosophy is something else.
Sure.
Philosophy is a very, very difficult academic subject to study. There's a tremendous amount of research and reading and concentration and thinking that has to go on, which is almost... it's like the antithesis of rock and roll. Rock and roll is with few exceptions, of course. I mean, there's some really great, very, very talented poets and songwriters, just look at Dylan and, people like Springsteen, others who really put a lot of thought and really work on their craft. But, for the most part, I mean, it's, the last thing that you're going to hear somebody talking about it at a party with a bunch of rock and rollers is, what'd you think of Immanuel Kant versus, did you know that Descartes got his axiom, the secret of nature is measurement and number. Did you know that was brought to him by an angel?
Let's break it here, Chris, okay? The book is Beyond the Robot. Gary Lachman is our guest. With Gene and Chris, you're in
the Paracast.
Thank you for listening to GCN. Visit GCNlive.com today.
Why be held hostage by your wireless carrier for 2 years? What if you had no contract, no activation fees, no hidden costs, tracking, tracing, harvesting customer data, or draconian gimmicks? All on America's largest 4G LTE, GSM, and Sprint networks. Introducing Pix Wireless. Activate your Sprint, AT&T, or unlock GSM phones with Pix and choose from an arsenal of monthly plans or build your own. Starting at only $2.99 per month. Get connected now. Call or click 1-866-205-9513 or PixWireless.com, spelled PIXWireless.com. Pick Pix and get connected today.
Want to build a maintenance-free, low and slow charcoal briquette fire that burns for hours for free? MeatMastersRadio.com will show you how to build a low-temp charcoal fire that's guaranteed fiddle-proof. It's easy and free. MeatMastersRadio.com teaches charcoal barbecue skills on new topics every week. Go to MeatMastersRadio.com. That's MeatMastersRadio.com.
My computer is so slow, it's making me crazy.
I used to have that problem.
Did you quit using the computer, or did you buy a new one?
No, I called Geeks On Site. They made an appointment to visit my home and showed up the same day.
You mean they didn't ask you to bring your computer to a shop? That's what happened when I called a support company.
Geeks On Site can go to your home or business or even repair your computer online. They have 24/7 emergency service.
If you are having problems with your PC or Mac, call Geeks On Site, 1-800-591-1682. Our friendly certified computer repair repair experts are available 24/7. Call now for a free diagnosis. 1-800-591-1682. Data recovery, virus removal, and maintenance for all laptops, desktops, printers, and networks. That's Geeks on Site for friendly, certified computer repair experts available 24/7 over the phone or in your home or business. Just call 1-800-591-1682. That's 1-800-591-1682. 1-800-591-1682.
My name is Lee and I'm 41. I've been using One World Wave for 2.5 years now. I suffered a bulged L4 and L5 disc from a car accident 3 years ago, and since that time I've been unable to walk long distances, do any minor lifting, or just normal activities with my children without having severe back pain. Since I've started using One World Way, I've been able to walk more, engage in activities with my children, and have less lower back pain. One World Way has helped me regain back my strength, confidence, and have a healthier life. I've noticed a weight loss of about 20 pounds, my A1C dropped 2 points, and I have more energy now. One World Way has helped me regain back my life.
The results for clients on One World Whey have surpassed the results for most any other supplements, as well as all other whey protein powders. One World Whey is non-denatured and frequency encoded. We believe the frequency encoding increases your body's production of glutathione and energy production. Call 888-988-3325 or visit oneworldwhey.com. That's oneworldwhey.com.
Dangerous blood clot device alert. If you or a loved one had an IVC filter placed to prevent blood clots from traveling to your heart or lungs and suffered an injury, you may be entitled to substantial financial compensation. The FDA warns that IVC filters may cause serious complications, such as heart or lung damage, internal bleeding, and even death. These dangerous blood clot devices can break, and the metal fragments can travel to your heart or lungs, causing serious injuries. If you or a loved one suffered organ damage or other injuries from an IVC filter, you may be entitled to substantial financial compensation. Act now. Time is limited to file a claim. For a free consultation and free information, call Injury Help Desk at 800-478-1507. 800-478-1507. 800-478-1507. This is an advertisement. Paid non-attorney spokesperson. InjuryHelpDesk.com is responsible for this advertisement. Principal office, Las Vegas, Nevada.
Hi, this is Bryce Abel. I'm the producer of Dark Skies, the co-author of AD After Disclosure, and you are listening to the Paracast, the gold standard of paranormal radio.
So let's leave rock and roll behind. Maybe we'll get back to it later.
Not so fast. Not so fast.
Okay, a little bit more rock and roll, Chris, but then we need to get back to philosophy and Colin Wilson.
It's going to dovetail nicely. One thing that I've noticed as the years have progressed, we've had ebbing and flowing waves of indignant parents and groups headed by Tipper Gore that really try to put a spotlight on the whole subject of the occult and popular music. And recently, in the last number of years, with, some kind of grandstanding by people like Jay-Z and Beyonce with a line of clothing with sort of Masonic symbols and that sort of thing, and Madonna and her studying the Kabbalah and stories like that. How big of a role do you really think the occult has in rock and roll, with actual serious practicing, shall we say, or serious occult practices that are being applied to music or any of the arts, for that matter, popular arts? Do you think that there is a large group of people that are actually actively pursuing this particular connection, or do you think most of it's just fully overblown by the press?
I think there's probably a few. Well, it depends what you mean by serious. But I think there's probably a few people that are serious, probably a few people that are really, get into it and do all the rituals and all that. But I think mostly it's probably blown up. It's something that it makes good copy. And it helps, it helps the celebrities as well. I write a bit about this at the end of my book on Aleister Crowley, which is subtitled Magic, Rock and Roll, and the Wickedest Man in the World.
Which I do have, by the way.
I mentioned earlier that, Crowley was this notorious, magician from, the early 20th century. He was rediscovered in the 60s and kind of seen as a proto-hippie. And ever since then, he's been a kind of icon for this aspect of rock and roll.
Mr. Crowley.
Yeah. And when I was in the business, let's say, the few people I met that had an interest in this, have to say they didn't impress me very much. And I don't mean to speak ill of the dead, but I do tell a story in New York Rocker about getting kicked out of David Bowie's loft in Midtown Manhattan because we had a disagreement precisely about Colin Wilson. I got invited to this party there, so I went, and then there was a lull in the conversation. And I could gather it had been about the occult in some way. And someone said, "Oh, well, Gary knows all about the occult because, you know, he reads Colin Wilson." So this is about 1980, 1981, something like that. And Bowie started saying something like, "Oh, Colin Wilson, he heads a coven in Cornwall and he goes around, you know, drawing pentagrams on people's doorsteps." And I said, "Well, actually, David, I don't think that's really quite true." And then he said, "Oh, yes, he sort of materializes dead Nazis," and all this kind of weird stuff he was saying. And I just, you know, very gently basically said, "Well, David, I really don't think that's the case." "Well, actually, no." And it's sort of like that. And then eventually he had these two women bodyguards, and they were very much like Thumper and Bambi from one of the early, you know, Bond films. I forget which one. I think it's Diamonds on Forever or something like that. And they basically come over and said, "You know, David's very tired. It's probably time you should go home." And they walked me out of the place. And then I later realized, like, what actually he was doing is that he had read some stuff that Wilson had written about somebody else and mushing it together in his head and saying it was about Wilson. So I think there's lots of people who take on this stuff, and as most artists do in different ways, they look for inspiration in different kinds of things, and they'll get something out of it, and then they move on to something else. I mean, like Jagger and the Rolling Stones, he was interested in the occult for a while at sort of the late 60s, 68, 69. But then after Altamont, when the whole hippie dream just went down the tubes, he dropped it very quickly. I think the real serious sort of people don't talk a lot about it because that's part of it. That's part of the seriousness about it, is not talking a lot about it.
Right. You have someone like a Jimmy Page who, even though he never talks about the subject, is known to be extremely adept and has, well, as far as Crowley goes, he's probably one of the top collectors of Crowleyana and Crowley memorabilia. And there's others, too, that you don't hear about near as much, that actually really are very, very passionate about the subject and are very active in it. But I think, like you're saying, most of it's kind of faddish and passing interest. For instance, Bowie, when he was really strung out on cocaine in L.A., was actually losing his marbles over paranoia induced by his study of the occult. So, anyway, I thought I'd bring that up because I do have more than a passing interest in the subject, and actually have the only surviving book from Crowley's library that was supposed to be burnt upon his death. I just happened to come into custodialship of this particular work.
What book is it?
It's the author's proof copy 0 of the first 200 of the Book of Thoth.
Oh, fantastic. My God. I mean, that's something Jimmy Page would be coming after you to get, as far as I can.
You know, one would think, but my brother and I had it from, I think we got it in 83 or 4, and we've been very faithfully keeping it in safe hands. And the pagination is completely different from all the other books, which I think anyone who knows anything about gematria and the attributional qualities of numbers. That's very important because it does link that particular book directly back to the Book of the Law, and there's a cipher that's pretty amazing in there. And I probably shouldn't be talking about this on the air.
But let me ask you a quick question, Chris. If Jimmy Page sent you an email and said, "Chris, $500,000.
Jimmy Page would never do that, number one. He's a real cheapskate.
It would be $50.
Well, we've turned down $28,000.
Well, at least we have a range there. I mean, you have your price, though. It's just a question.
It's priceless to the right person. There is no price on it. And the book is not for sale. I would never, ever use the word sale or sell in conjunction with that book. I will be handsomely rewarded for my very faithful custodialship of a very important magical item. The book will never be sold. I know a little bit too much about this subject matter to even consider that as even a possibility.
Gary, let's move from rock and roll to Colin Wilson.
All right.
He's not a household name, So maybe tell us something about his background and more about the things that attracted you to his work. You did meet him at some point in time, right?
Yes. Well, at one point he was sort of a household name, but that's 60 years ago.
The Outside.
Yeah. His first book is called The Outsider, and it was published in 1956. And it was a surprise bestseller on both sides of the Atlantic. He is a Brit. He grew up in the industrial Midlands. Leicester, city called Leicester, whose football team surprisingly won the big prize last year. He basically, he worked for years at all these different menial kinds of jobs. He refused to sort of succumb to the system. And he had an overpowering desire to not to sort of fight off this kind of boredom, this kind of lethargy, this kind of sleep that he felt that most of the people around him were in. And what he did, he had a great, profound belief in his own brilliance and genius. And then for years he worked at becoming a writer. And as I said, he would move from job to job, digging ditches, washing dishes, being a hospital porter, being a busboy in a calf and all this kind of thing, and wrote and wrote and wrote. What happened is that he wrote this book about characters like himself who were on the outside of society, who were seeking something deeper and more meaningful than the sort of button-down 9-to-5, bourgeois world that was available to them. And he handed it in, part of it to a publisher here, who immediately recognized that this was a brilliant work. And then when it was published in May of 1956, it was an overnight success. He woke up the next morning. He was 24 years old, this young man, and his first book was an overnight success. And all of the top sort of highbrow book reviewers of the day, people like Cyril Connolly, who's still known, to people who are, familiar with English literature. He was a friend of Orwell and Huxley and all that crowd, and was a big name. And Philip Toynbee, Edith Sitwell, J.B. Priestley, all of these wonderful, very important writers were singing his praises.
All right. We've got more to come with Gary Lachman and Gene and Chris. You're in
the Paracast.
Thank you for listening to GCN. Visit GCNlive.com today.
We also have swag. We have all these exclusive Paracast things that you can buy. We've got 60 or so different items, and entails t-shirts, sleeves for notebook computers, iPad cases, mouse pads, the Paracast Jumbo tote bag, all sorts of t-shirts and jackets and stuff like that for men and women. We have a Paracast aluminum water bottle. All this stuff, you go to store.theparacast.com, store.theparacast.com. What makes it special is that the items are the best quality, great t-shirts, fabrics, and they have our official logo on them. That's what makes them special, in multiple sizes and colors. We even have stuff for children, stuff for women, stuff for men. We have all sorts of sizes, like small up to X large. A lot of good stuff. That's the swag from the Paracast. You go to store.theparacast.com, stop by, and take a shopping tour.
Paid non-attorney spokesperson Adam Pulaski of the Pulaski Law Firm with principal office in Houston, Texas is the attorney responsible for the content of this ad. This ad is not legal advice, and the choice of a lawyer should not be based solely upon advertisement. Services may not be available in all states. Attention Xarelto users. If you or a loved one took Xarelto and suffered a serious bleeding event, you may be entitled to financial compensation. Xarelto is a popular prescription blood thinner used to prevent blood clots and protect patients from strokes. These serious bleeding events have led to numerous cases of hospitalization and even death. Phone lines are open 24/7. Call 800-261-0937. That's 800-261-0937.
Want to build a maintenance-free, low and slow charcoal briquette fire that burns for hours for free? MeatMastersRadio.com will show you how to build a low-temp charcoal fire that's guaranteed fiddle-proof. It's easy and free. MeatMastersRadio.com teaches charcoal barbecue skills on new topics every week. Go to MeatMastersRadio.com. That's MeatMastersRadio.com.
Are you retired or facing retirement and you're afraid your income is going to be less than you'd like? I'm Pharmacist Keith. Dr. Wallach, the Dead Doctors Don't Lie guy, and I want to show you a low-cost way to create your own business working around your current schedule, creating extra income that will last for years to come by joining Dr. Wallach's crusade, spreading his message of better health. To learn more, visit radio.recordedvideo.com. That's radio.recordedvideo.com, radio.recordedvideo.com, or call 866-257-3105 for a recorded message.
Hi, Peter Vaccaro for ParanormalDate.com. Are you looking for love in all the wrong places? Now you have a chance to change that by signing up for free at ParanormalDate.com. This incredible dating site puts people of like minds together. People who are interested in the strange, the unusual, mysteries, ghosts, UFOs, and the afterlife, and so much more. ParanormalDate.com was developed for you, people seeking a viable alternative to the other dating services. You can join for free by going to ParanormalDate.com, and if you decide you like it and want to connect with people, use the code GEORGE for a substantial discount. Mark Rawlings, president of ParanormalDate.com, says so many people hunger to share their experiences about the paranormal, the unexplainable, or the afterlife, and so much more, and this is the source for them to meet and share that common interest. So sign up for free at ParanormalDate.com, ParanormalDate.com, and use the code GEORGE if you decide to connect with someone you like.
By now you know that wireless technology like cell phones do in fact pose dangers to the health and privacy of everyone. Block-It Pocket's wide range of products are unmatched in providing the protection you deserve. No scare tactics, just common sense. BlockItPocket.com offers quality American-made options to alleviate and eliminate these invisible dangers. Learn more at BlockItPocket.com or call 888-315-9618. BlockItPocket.com, enhancing health and privacy.
Hey, this is Marie D. Jones, the author of This Book is from the Future, and you are listening to the Paracast, the gold standard of paranormal radio.
So we're painting the background here, the early days of Colin Wilson, where he suddenly, overnight, becomes a best-selling author. And that itself, for a guy of 24, has got to be a pretty big deal, a huge deal.
Oh, absolutely. And the strange thing was that the book was about what he says, alienation, creativity, and extreme mental states. It was about these strange characters who lived on the outskirts of society. And one of the things that was really influential about the book was that it talked about people that at the time nobody knew about, who subsequently became very, very popular. People like Hermann Hesse, who was the German writer whose novels I grew up reading in the 70s, and then they became really big in the late 60s and then in the 70s and all that. And also Gurdjieff, who's this enigmatic Armenian Russian esoteric teacher. But he's also talking about existentialism and people like Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus and all of these kind of strange characters that are driven by this need to have a kind of deeper sense of meaning and purpose. And this became a bestseller. But then what happened was that he got caught up in what was called the angry young men craze. And this was sort of the British kind of version of the Beat Generation. These were these writers who were basically, dropping out of society and, basically what most of them were talking about were these social issues. But Wilson was interested in something that was much more of a kind of a spiritual, mystical kind of experience. In any case, all this stuff got a lot of press at the time. And it was in the Sunday supplements and it was in the news all the time. And you have to say, this is 56. It's around the same time that Elvis was becoming popular and James Dean had just passed away not too long ago. So that's the kind of media craze that we're familiar with now was something that was new and was happening. And he got caught up in it. And as happens here often, the Brits really like a success story, but then they also like it when it turns around and you're brought down. And so a few months after everyone was singing his praises, they turned against him and he became persona non grata. And basically he left London and moved to the far west of England, which is Cornwall, the furthest tip down near Penzance, where the pirates are from and all that.
Let me ask you a question here about fleeting fame, though. Did he do anything or say anything, or is it just people decided, well, it wasn't so great after all what he wrote?
Well, I think the thing with him was that he's a young man. He had spent 10 years learning how to write. He confided in his journal how much he believed in himself and his genius and all that. Then when he woke up that morning and everybody else agreed with him, all the newspapers were saying, yes, Colin, you're right. He was very naive and very candid. And when he would be talking, in interviews, he would just sort of say, yes, well, actually, I have to believe in myself. And yes, and he was doing the kind of thing that English you're not supposed to do. You're supposed to be rather humble and modest about your achievements. You're not supposed to draw attention to yourself. And also there was a backlash, I think, because he was a working class writer. He came out of this. His father worked in a boot and shoe factory and earned £3 a week during the 30s. He was definitely working class. And he was criticizing the system. And in England, the system doesn't mind being criticized if it's done by one of its members. So if an Aldous Huxley, let's say, or an Orwell or something like that, who's part of kind of the upper class, more or less, does it, that's okay. But they don't like if somebody from the working class is doing it. And then Wilson also was not a university kid. He didn't go to university. He left school when he was 16 after an aborted suicide attempt, and hitchhiked around England, hitchhiked around France, slept rough all the time, and read and read and read and read. So he kind of came out of the cold. And I think people felt a little embarrassed after singing his praises at first. And then what had happened was that he was getting too much publicity because he was kind of like a literary Elvis in a way. He was kind of like a pop star. And he found himself in the company of people like Marilyn Monroe on one occasion, and Laurence Olivier, and other actors. Because of his fame, he was being invited to these parties and things like that and so on. And so he's wound up in the papers a lot. And I think, the idea was like, well, he can't really be that serious of a writer if he's, turning up in the Sunday supplements all the time. And there's all this kind of stuff going on. There was a lot of – the other thing that happened is that the press kind of invented this. The press invented this angry young man thing going on because there was not much happening at the time. And so, they build something up and then they knock it down. So he got caught up in that. But what happened to him, rather than the other writers, where many of them stopped writing, he just kept going.
God. He wrote over 50 books, I think, didn't he? Probably even more than that.
Wrote over 100.
100, there you go. I mean, talk about a guy that could crank it out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Plus, he edited a number of books and co-authored a number of books as well. The Goblin Universe, the Ted Halliday book, is one of my all-time favorites. And he wrote an extensive beginning to that because Halliday actually died before the book came out, and it was never actually supposed to be published. And it went on to be, I think, a very, very important book that not many people really are aware of. I've got a number of his books.
This is the Goblin Universe, I think.
The Goblin Universe, right?
Yeah. No, I mean, well, Wilson was instrumental in getting that book published. I mean,
yeah.
He put it together. I mean, he's had a very long career. So he went from being sort of really well known to being a kind of pariah. And then he had a comeback in the early 70s because he wrote a book about the occult. And the occult had become very popular again in the mid 60s. There was a book called The Morning of the Magicians that came out in the early 60s. And this kind of kicked off what's known as the occult revival of the 1960s. And by the mid 60s, you have the most famous people in the world, like the Beatles, and then the second most famous, the Rolling Stones, getting interested in all this kind of stuff. Crowley's on the cover of Sgt. Pepper's, and so on and so on. People like Jung, Aldous Huxley, who wrote Doors of Perception, which was about, use of mescaline and all that. So at the end of the 60s, Wilson is asked to write this book about the occult, and he's really not interested in it. He's always, kind of read it. It was fun, reads, but he didn't take it seriously. He was a serious philosopher and so on and all that. But then when he did the research, he realized, oh my God, actually, there's as much evidence here for the validity of this as there is for like neutrinos or protons or whatever you want to call these weird things that, elementary physicists find. And so he wrote this book, and it brought him out of the cold again. It was a bestseller, and it's what introduced me to this whole topic and also introduced lots of other people.
Yeah, including me. That was my first Wilson book that I read, the first one I got, too.
Now, just to point things out here, we're 3 years too late on interviewing him. He died in 2013, but was in really bad health from 2011 on. But I also noticed he wrote a lot of fiction.
Yes. He wrote quite a few novels, and they're very good reads. I mean, in fact, just recently I gave a talk at the British Museum here in London, which is, it's like the Met. It's like a huge museum here.
Pretty prestigious gig there, Guy.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you very much. I told the story of like what he used to do at one point to save money. He didn't, there was one summer where he didn't rent a room somewhere. This is 1954. He was about 22. What he did was he got a waterproof sleeping bag, and he would sleep up. There's this big open patch of Greenland at the north of London here called the Hampstead Heath. And it's like a wonderful, kind of huge park. And he would sleep there at night, then cycle down and write during the day at the British Museum in what used to be the old reading room, where people like Marx and Bernard Shaw and H.G. Wells had worked. And while this is before he was working on The Outsider, he wrote a novel called Ritual in the Dark, which is a kind of existential thriller. And it's best described as Jack the Ripper meets the brothers Karamazov in post-war London, because it uses the sort of the theme of the Ripper murders to investigate questions of freedom and purpose and consciousness and all these kinds of things. And then he went on to write many, many other novels. One of his best is called The Mind Parasites, which is a science fiction novel about these kind of psychic vampires living in the mind. And they've been sucking human, vitality dry for centuries. And
sounds like the U.S. Political system.
Oh, well.
Uh-oh, Chris is mentioning the P word here.
Yeah. Say, many minds left there to suck dry.
So they've done a damn good job, because America is now filled with the largest concentration of people in waking coma that probably have ever existed. So they've done a great job. They've sucked the American public dry.
So he wrote lots of fiction. And what he also did was he was very good at using sort of genre fiction for his philosophical purposes. So he wrote in all different fields. He wrote science fiction. He wrote crime novels. He even wrote sort of pornographic novels or sort of erotic novels. And that's something that's of great interest in a lot of his early work is sex. Sex is something that, he thought about a great deal, to put it that way. But it's not lurid. It's not or it isn't sort of titillating or even like approaching pornography, say like somebody like Henry Miller is doing. He's actually trying to analyze because he's interested in these moments of intensity, these sort of power experiences. The orgasm is one of them, but you also get them from what he calls peak experiences. He borrows the term from the American psychologist Abraham Maslow.
Let's do our break here and go back with Gary Lachman talking about Colin Wilson and more with Gene and Chris. You're in
the Paracast.
You are listening to GCN. Visit GCNlive.com today.
Attack of the Rockoids has been well received by critics and readers alike. It's a thrill-a-minute story you'll never forget. A former U.S. military intelligence officer is haunted by intense dreams about a beautiful woman pleading for his help after a terrible battle in outer space. But the dreams turn out to be true and thrust him into a telepathic love affair with a woman whose faraway planet is intent on destroying the Earth. And now the gripping tale continues in The Coming of the Protectors. It's the second book of the Rockoids trilogy, a galaxy-spanning adventure that pits our hapless heroes against powerful, fanatical enemies that threaten the lives of freedom-loving beings everywhere. Attack of the Rockoids and The Coming of the Protectors. Classic science fiction at its best. Available now. For more details, visit rockoids.com. That's ROCKOIDS.com.
This is Dan Pilla. Do you owe the IRS money you can't pay? Are tax debts crippling you? I've defended people from the IRS for over 30 years. I've helped thousands, and I can help you too. I wrote the book on IRS settlement, and I'm telling you, there's no such thing as a hopeless case. Call 800-34-NO-TAX to finally get free of IRS debt. With the IRS's new programs, there's never been a better time to solve your problem. Call 800-34-NO-TAX. That's 800-34-NO-TAX, or my website, danpilla.com.
There is an affordable alternative to the high cost of healthcare that offers freedom from insurance while providing compliance with the Obamacare individual mandate. Imagine having access to quality, affordable healthcare that allows you the freedom to choose your doctor and hospital. Members can share up to 100% of necessary medical expenses, including some alternative treatments. Find out how you and your family can contain healthcare costs without giving up your freedom. Go to libertyoncall.org. That's libertyoncall.org.
'Call.org. That's libertyoncall.org.
Welcome back to the Paracast, the gold standard of paranormal radio. And now, here's Gene Steinberg.
So, Gary Lachman, you're talking about Colin Wilson and his focus in his books on sexuality. Would you go on with that, please?
Well, sex is something that occupied Wilson's attention, not only in, the usual way it does.
Now, when you say usual, do you mean the repressed English?
No, I mean the sense that, I could imagine people tittering in the background about, wow, whose attention isn't occupied by it? But you know what I mean. As a young man, he was very interested in sex. One of the things that he regrets, or he says in his autobiography, is that he was very devoted to his wife Joy, who they were together for, God, who knows, forever, from 54 on or something like that until his death. So a very long time. But he did have ample opportunities to stray, which he did not take. But he was always very interested in sex because he wasn't interested in drugs, or the drug of his choice was alcohol and mostly red wine. So he wasn't really part of the 60s kind of drug thing, and he actually was quite critical of it in some ways. But sex was this kind of altered state, or this intensity experience that was a powerful one for him. And in his novels and in some of his philosophical works, he focuses on it a great deal. And he wrote a book in the early 60s called Origin of the Sexual Impulse. And yes, it goes without saying that he's looking at it from a male point of view. So it's a male point of view about the sexual impulse. But he's trying to understand what exactly is it? What exactly is it that drives, and what is the nature of the sexual impulse? And the conclusion he comes to is it's got much more to do with the mind, much more to do with imagination than it does with any kind of simple physical response. In the same way, say, that hunger or thirst is a kind of simple physical response. One of the insights he has, which, depending on how you look at it, may seem impressive or may seem banal, is that if we're hungry, you can't imagine a steak and actually eat it and satisfy the hunger. If you're thirsty, you can't imagine a glass of water and drink it and satisfy the thirst. But if you feel sexually aroused, you can imagine a sexual partner to which you can focus your sexual attention and then bring yourself to a satisfying conclusion, right? Many people do this very often. So sex must be something to do at least as much with the mind and the imagination as it does just with the simple kind of physical bodily response. Because if it was a simple bodily response, then we would not be able to satisfy it in the same way that we can in the same way that we can't satisfy hunger or thirst in that way. And so it's from that beginning that he looks, and he's very good at analyzing both his own experience and the accounts of others' experience, people like Henry Miller or Vladimir Nabokov, who wrote Lolita, and a variety of other people writing about D.H. Lawrence, de Sade. And he writes really brilliantly, I think, about Victorian pornography and how it is kind of a weird sort of aftergrowth of romanticism. In a way, it's a kind of idealism, in a way, because it idealized sex into something that is actually much more intense than it really is.
Right. And of course, he, being born in the early 30s, there was still a little bit of a residual kind of cultural sort of tidewater flat of Victorian England, of course, probably sexually one of the most repressed periods in history, and especially among the Brits. And I mean, it was so bad that I forget who brought up this little quip on an interview I heard, but they would actually dress the legs of pianos with pant legs because they felt that even the sight of the leg of a piano might arouse young boys. That's really going over the top.
No, that's absolutely true. And he was coming out as a writer at a time when there was still obscenity laws and censorship and things of that sort. I mean, in fact, at one point before he made it, when he was hoboing around in France and he ended up in Paris, he got a job trying to sell copies of the Paris Review, which was just getting up at the time. This is about 1952 or 53. It's since become, one of the most recognized literary journals of all time. And George Plimpton was the guy who started it.
Let me just tell you something really stupid. Back in the 1970s, I worked for a typesetting plant in New York City and the Paris Review was one of our clients.
There you go.
So I probably read lots of articles unconsciously and maybe absorbed a few.
Could very well. In Wilson's case, the Paris Review was kind of like the acceptable sort of literary world that he had found himself in Paris at the time. But at the same time, he met writers who were working for this French publisher named Maurice Girodias, who was responsible for the Olympia Press. And if you know what the Olympia Press was were these books that you could not get over the channel. They were sold in France, and they were literary works, but they were about sex. So you had Lolita, or you had The Ginger Man by Dunleavy, or you had Miller's books. And they published early on William Burroughs and things like that. And all these writers that Wilson met there at the time were actually, working on serious books, but they were also sort of supplementing their income a great deal by writing sort of, kind of $1 a page, pornography for Maurice Girodias. And Girodias approached him to write a book about sex, a kind of sex novel. He accepted doing it because he wanted to be able to have the freedom to write. And as I said, there was still a kind of repression in England about writing about this kind of thing. But actually, when he talked to his English publisher, mentioned that he was doing this book on sex, he said, "Well, let me take a look at it before you sign the contract completely and all that." So he did, and it wound up being published here. And original title was Man Without a Shadow, but to Wilson's chagrin, but probably very wisely by the publicist's point of view, the publisher changed it to The Sex Diary of Gerard Sorm. And Gerard Sorm is the character who's in Wilson's first novel, The Ritual in the Dark, which itself is about sex a great deal. And this is a journal about this kind of rootless intellectual character who finds himself in London about his sexual experiences. And interesting thing about the book is that one of the characters in it is based on Aleister Crowley. And this is about 1962. So Crowley had yet to be, embraced, by the pop culture then. He was still kind of an eccentric figure. So Wilson was ahead of the game there, once again, writing about somebody like that. And this was something he doesn't get credit for. I mentioned Hermann Hesse, but he was also ahead of the game writing about H.P. Lovecraft, the great horror fiction writer, who's since, I don't know about in the States, but over here in England, he's turning up in Penguin Classics. I mean, I grew up reading Lovecraft in these wonderful, paperback reprints of this, pulp stuff that he was writing in the 20s and the 30s, along with Robert E. Howard, who wrote, the Conan stories and stuff like that. But Wilson was writing about him in advance too. So this is another thing about him that really myself and many other people appreciate him for, because he introduced us to lots of other things that probably wouldn't have known about,
it sure didn't hurt to have an incredibly, just an incredible writing style. One of the better writers, really, I think, in the 20th century, just in terms of pure, just brilliant writing style. Just really good. One of my favorites.
Absolutely.
So what aspects of his work, I mean, it's really difficult to write a book about an author as prolific as he was. What aspect, or give our listeners a sense of how you approached such a daunting task, and give us a sense of what your thinking process was going into it.
Well, one of the things I wanted to do was to show that there is a unifying idea behind all his books. I mean, I mentioned he wrote about 118 books. They're not all the same size. Some are kind of smaller pamphlets and all, but in general, that's still quite a bit. In fact, I remember one time I was interviewing him. I asked him if he intended to outright H.G. Wells, and he laughed. And, I think he did want to do that.
Let's have more of this in our next segment. We're just getting into this rich remembrance of the subject of our discussion, Colin Wilson, with Gary Lachman and Gene and Chris. You're in
the Paracast.
the award-winning graphic converter, the universal genius for photo editing on your Mac. Join over 1.5 million loyal users for this Swiss Army knife photo editing app. It gives you all you expect from a top-flight image editing app with tons of features, and most important, it's easy to use. Get 20% off from lemkesoft.de/Gene. That's lemkesoft.de/Gene. Do you need a website? Well, you can get a great deal on hosting services with Namecheap's legendary coupon code. They're offering substantial hosting discounts on shared hosting, business hosting, VPS hosting, reseller hosting, and even dedicated servers. Namecheap is preferred by millions. It's backed by a money-back guarantee. Use the coupon code LEGENDARY to cash in on the special deal at Namecheap.com, Namecheap.com.
Are you worried about your mom or dad living alone in their house? Hi, I'm Joan London. Listen, I know how difficult it is to find senior care for someone you love. That's why I recommend a free service called A Place for Mom. They are the nation's largest senior living referral service. Call A Place for Mom today.
To receive free information on senior living communities in your area, call A Place for Mom at 1-800-704-6182.
A Place for Mom offers free one-on-one advice from local advisors and a personalized list of senior living communities you can visit. If you have questions about senior care for your mom or dad, there's a place for answers, A Place for Mom.
Call A Place for Mom in the next 10 minutes to get your free ebook on financing senior care as well as free information on senior living communities in your area. Call 1-800-704-6182. That's 1-800-704-6182.
As a doctor, I see patients every day who are losing their vision to age-related macular degeneration, also known as AMD. If you have blurry vision or blind spots, they can be symptoms of AMD, and if untreated, could lead to blindness. The good news, AMD can be managed with effective clinically approved treatments that may reverse some vision loss. For free AMD information, contact the Foundation Fighting Blindness at 1-800-BLINDNESS. That's 1-800-BLINDNESS. There is a cure in sight.
Hi, this is Ted Anderson. Investment Rarities, a 43-year-old company, has created the best silver offer ever. Get a U.S. Silver Eagle, Canadian Maple Leaf, Austrian Philharmonic, OPM Pure Bar, and Silver Round. Have all 5 for $99 postpaid. You heard me right, 5 ounces of silver below cost. No credit card fees, free shipping. Just $99 and you'll have a great start on what it takes to survive even the worst economic storm. Act now and receive Jim Cook's exclusive paper explaining how it's possible to make a fortune in silver today. Don't miss this opportunity. Call 800-328-1860. Read how the above-ground supply of silver has dropped below even gold. The secret is being suppressed. The price could explode at any time. Call today at 800-328-1860. Get 5 ounces of silver for only $99. Find them on the web at investmentrarities.com or call 800-328-1860. Call now before it's too late. 800-328-1860.
We use mobile devices right against our bodies every day, but growing scientific evidence has emerged showing serious health risks associated with exposure to EMF radiation emitted from these devices. The solution is Defender Shield, the most effective mobile radiation shielding ever developed. Defender Shield blocks virtually 100% of EMF radiation from cell phones, tablets, and laptops, and starts at just $64.99. Buy now at DefenderShield.com. For 10% off, use promo code GCN. DefenderShield.com, the worldwide leader in mobile radiation shielding.
We'd like to hear from you. If you have a comment or question about the Paracast, send it to news@theparacast.com. That's news@theparacast.com. And don't forget to visit our famous Paracast community forums at forum.theparacast.com.
As our listeners probably realize, I have not followed Colin Wilson all that much. I was aware of him, read some of his stuff over the years. And so I'm sitting here listening to Gary Lachman, learning a lot about this guy. Fascinating that he covered such a wide range of subjects. Now, it's interesting here when I look at the review in the Washington Post of your book. There's an interesting sentence here. And obviously the person who wrote this is a skeptic about a lot of this. He said, how could anyone actually treat dowsing, UFOs, and alien abduction seriously? Now, the reason I brought this out is because, obviously, on the Paracast, we do treat UFOs and alien abductions seriously. Maybe not as the way most people would explain them. So to really digress here, because there's so much ground to cover for a guy who wrote 118 books that we can't cover it all, what did Colin Wilson have to say about UFOs and related stuff?
Well, that's an interesting story. As often happens with professional writers, people approach them and ask them if they'd be interested in writing a book about something. And Wilson had done a very successful book here in the mid '90s in the UK for Virgin Publications, called From Atlantis to the Sphinx, which was about basically how old the Sphinx actually is, and trying to understand the ideas that it may be much older than the conventional authorities would say. And that book did very, very well. So he was approached by his editor at Virgin and said, would you like to do a book about UFOs, about alien abductions? And Wilson had to admit that this was something that he had just, he hadn't paid much attention to. The books he remembered reading, like, were from the 50s, George Adamski, his Flights Off to Venus and things of that sort. But being a professional, and as he says in his autobiographies, always needing the money, he said, yep, sure, that's fine. And so he started to do the research. And one of the things that he discovered was that actually this fellow he knew, John Mack, whose name you probably remember, he had met him before, but not in the context of his work on the abduction phenomenon. Mack had written a book about T.E. Lawrence of Arabia. And Lawrence of Arabia featured in Wilson's book, The Outsider. He was one of these eccentric characters that he wrote about. And so he was surprised to see this book by Mack when he started doing all this research. And then he read Mack's book, heard his story and all that, and he became convinced that, well, I don't know exactly what's going on here, but something is going on here, as our recent Nobel Prize winner once said in a song a long time ago. Something's going on here, but we don't know exactly what it is. Wilson investigated, as he did with all his books. He gathers all the research material he can. He makes a big pile of it around himself, and he reads through all of it, and he interviews people he can about this sort of thing, and then thinks about it a great deal and comes to some kind of conclusion. And he really came to the conclusion that something's going on with these abduction episodes. We don't know if it's actually people being picked up and brought into some, nuts and bolts flying saucer. But his take on it was much more along the lines of, say, Jacques Vallée, in the sense that there is some kind of strange interdimensional sort of thing that is linked to older stories about, fairies or the small people, or a variety of different kinds of experiences in the past of things in the sky and so on, that our current view of these things, or the current view at the time, say, from the 40s up until the 50s and 60s, about actual kind of crafts flying from other planets coming here, is part of this narrative, this kind of story, but actually it's something more than that, something psychic, it's something to do with consciousness. And his conclusion in all this is that he really feels that these experiences that people are going through in these abduction things, as weird and crazy and absolutely absurd as they sound. And I mean, myself, I too hadn't kept up with a lot of literature about it. A good friend of mine here, Mark Pilkington in the UK, has written about the UFO experience and did a film about it. And so what I knew about it, kind of came from him.
Yeah, Mark's a great guy, super guy. We've had him on the show. I really admire him.
So you know who he is. So there you go. But Wilson came to the conclusion that some kind of experiment in the sense of trying to alter people's consciousness, get them ready for some kind of change, some kind of shift in the overall evolution of consciousness on the planet, in a way, to put it, kind of grandly, is involved in this. And again, he saw it more in terms of a kind of experience with our consciousness, a kind of widening, expanding, deepening of it to include things that are conventional, scientific, materialist, reductionist, whatever you want to call it, point of view just don't allow. So that was his kind of end sort of take on it. And one of the books that I followed up after I read his book called Alien Dawn. This came out in the early 90s, a little bit later, Alien Dawn, late 90s, about the UFO experience, was this wonderful novel called Miracle Visitors by a science fiction writer here called Ian Watson. And in many ways, I would say that novel is a better introduction to the whole abduction kind of experience than the kind of standard, sort of nonfiction works about it. Because it takes this whole notion of something happening in consciousness itself is involved in these kinds of things.
Let me ask you here, because this is what you're saying is basically preaching to the choir here. But so many people interested in these subjects, they can't look beyond physical craft, physical aliens, kidnapping physical people and taking them through the window by levitation or whatever. Why are so many people, do you think, hung up on this? Is it because they just haven't really been exposed to the literature, or is it something that they're not able to accept a much more complicated solution or answer?
Well, I think this is something that you can see throughout history, that there's a tendency in some people, perhaps most, to take things literally. That's how they can understand them. And then there's some others, perhaps a smaller group of people, who can understand it, say, symbolically or metaphorically. And I don't mean to say, in saying this now, that the UFO experience is a metaphor or a symbol, just that there are other ways of interpreting things. This is a theme, not in context with the UFO experience, but just in consciousness in general and how we understand our experience, that I write about in another book of mine called The Secret Teachers of the Western World, which is more or less a kind of history of the West. Western consciousness is seen through the sort of esoteric view of things. And there really is, you can see, there really is a struggle at different times in Western history between, we can say, the literalists and the symbolists, people who not only want to, but this is the only way they can understand things in a very simple, literal, nuts and bolts, matter-of-fact kind of way. And you get that both in religion and in science and in everything else. I mean, the people who believe, the fundamentalists of whatever faith, who believe in the literal interpretation of their particular, religious text, they're like that. And they've always, throughout history, they have always persecuted the people who can understand it in a symbolist or metaphoric or an analogical kind of way. I think this is one of the real struggles, and I think there's a history of that needs to be written. So yeah, and also, when I was a kid in the 60s, what I saw on Saturday morning, sci-fi or horror movies was all these great 50s sci-fi movies about the flying saucers.
Let's talk a little bit more about the flying saucers before we move on. We've got Gene and Chris and Gary. You're in
the Paracast.
Thank you for listening to GCN. Be sure to visit GCNlive.com today.
Hi, this is Ted Anderson. I'm here to tell you about GCNtelecare.com, a team of board-certified doctors assisting you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Within 15 minutes of registration, care your family can afford. Revolutionizing the healthcare industry, virtual consulting providing diagnosis of non-emergency medical issues by phone or secure video on computer or smart mobile devices. GCNtelecare.com. Virtual care anywhere.
Paid non-attorney spokesperson Adam Pulaski of the Pulaski Law Firm with principal office in Houston, Texas is the attorney responsible for the content of this ad. This ad is not legal advice, and the choice of a lawyer should not be based solely upon advertisement. Services may not be available in all states. Attention Xarelto users. If you or a loved one took Xarelto and suffered a serious bleeding event, you may be entitled to financial compensation. Xarelto is a popular prescription blood thinner used to prevent blood clots and protect patients from strokes. These serious bleeding events have led to numerous cases of hospitalization and even death. Phone lines are open 24/7. Call 800-261-0937. That's 800-261-0937.
Attention small business owners. Want to save money on your employee health insurance plan? Learn the little-known solution that could save thousands of dollars on your health insurance benefits and save your employees money, too. Call Health Markets for a free consultation, and one of our 3,000 local agents will show you how to make healthcare reform work for you. We'll design customized solutions for your business that can lower healthcare costs for you and your employees. We'll work directly with you to determine your needs. We search thousands of health plans from over 180 health insurance companies nationwide. You'll also find out if tax credits could save you money. Best of all, the service is free of charge. See why Health Markets has enrolled Americans in more than 2 million insurance policies. You don't have to wait for open enrollment to lower your cost. Call now. Find out how much you and your employees could be saving.
Representatives are standing by to assist you. Call 800-930-5137. That's 800-930-5137. 800-930-5137.
Will the government protect your family from Iran and North Korea's newest weapon, EMP? We buy guns to protect ourselves, home, health, and car insurance for accidents. Maybe you also have food storage. But how would you keep your refrigerator running in a long-term EMP blackout? Using tested military designs, the Solarc EMP-hardened solar generator protects and powers your critical appliances for years without burying items underground or wrapping them in aluminum foil. Unlike other preps, Solarc is used every day to help offset your electric bill automatically. Visit portablesolarllc.com to learn how easily expandable the system is. Solarc is the most affordable and powerful solution on the market. The whole system even fits in the back of a pickup or SUV and can install in less than an hour. See for yourself why Solarc beats other off-grid systems at portablesolarllc.com. Don't wait for the government. Go to portablesolarllc.com to learn why Solarc is energy insurance for your family.
Back to the music in a minute, but first I've got a special free giveaway. I've got 100 free trials of the belly flattening breakthrough new biotics here, and I've been authorized to give them away to the station's first 100 callers right now. So if you want to see what you'd look like with a flatter belly, call now. Don't even wait till I stop talking. Only one free trial per caller, though. Don't be greedy. Okay, here's the number. 1-800-983-5628. I'm guessing it works pretty fast because it says here that if your belly flattening results are too dramatic, you're supposed to reduce use to every other day. And it looks like it's made from natural ingredients, too, scientifically formulated to cleanse pounds of toxic sludge from your body. Okay, this is it. If you want a flatter belly, be one of the first 100 callers right now to claim one of these free trials. 1-800-983-5628. If lines are busy, try again. 1-800-983-5628. Call now for details. 1-800-983-5628.
This is Robert Hastings, author of UFOs and Nukes, and you're listening to the Paracast, the gold standard of paranormal radio.
So you recall, of course, watching TV in the New York area in, say, the 60s and 50s and seeing all the sci-fi stuff and seeing all those programs on TV. You're probably too young to remember this because you were born, in the mid-50s. So they used to have a character on TV named Captain Video and his Video Rangers, way before your time. And a lot of it was done live in New York, and they had real sci-fi writers sometimes writing the scripts. But they lost all the copies of the show, so you can't find it anymore. But Captain Video was like, Captain Kirk. You're not quite as wacky, but...
No. Well, I tell you, the first thing I remember watching on television was a cartoon called Colonel Bleep. That I don't know. I mean, I found it on YouTube again, but it is the strangest, most surreal thing. And if you go back, you look at the stuff that one was watching when you're young, it's amazing how weird it is. But no, I mean, I grew up. I said Earth versus the Flying Saucers, the day the Earth stood still. It came from outer space. All these wonderful 50s black and white. Sci-fi films, and then with Earth versus the Flying Saucers, you have Ray Harryhausen's fantastic animation and all that. But that was kind of the, that was sort of the idea that what these were about. And one of the first ones to kind of question whether they were nuts and bolts or something more psychic was Jung, Carl Jung. The second most famous psychologist in the world.
Right. His last book.
Yeah, the Flying Saucers, a myth of things seen in the sky. And he thought because the saucers were round in shape mostly, although, obviously this is cigar-shaped ones and all that kind of thing, that these were somehow kind of, well, as I said in a few books of mine, they were mandalas from outer space. And mandalas are these Tibetan sort of, magic circles. That are used in meditation.
Well, it's a symbol of transformation.
Yeah, and Jung himself in his research and his work with his clients found that these were spontaneously produced by the unconscious at different times, both as a kind of reaction to, periods of crisis and stress in the individual, and a kind of goal, a kind of target you moved yourself toward. But Jung felt that the whole phenomena of the flying saucers from what's his name, Kenneth I can't remember his name.
Kenneth Arnold.
Kenneth Arnold in 1947 and all that, on to when Jung was writing, say, in the late 50s, that these were a product of the kind of schizophrenia that the whole world had found itself in, where you have the two superpowers, facing off. The planet was experiencing this kind of crisis of split personality, and was projecting, humanity en masse was projecting these images of wholeness up into the sky. And so this is kind of the beginning, at least in a broadly popular way, of this notion that actually, maybe the flying saucers aren't real, ships from someplace. Maybe they've got something to do with some inner world of our own that's being projected out there. And obviously,
where do you come
from? LA, people like that. I don't know. I mean, God, the planets that we know are very close to us. There ain't nothing much happening there, and it's really far away to anything else. So I kind of think it's got something more to do with just consciousness in some way. And in some strange way, I think consciousness itself, something that we are led to believe by conventional science and, the pundits people are supposed to know, it's just a kind of little pool of awareness that is in each of our individual skulls. No, I think it has a much broader existence, and it exists as some kind of field at large. And I think it's kind of, I don't know, kind of testing us in some ways,
So like
are we able, a friend, someone recently, just said to me, like, my God, what's happening in the world? We have Syria, everyone's fighting everybody else, and they don't quite know who they're shooting at anymore. So many things seem to be cracking up and breaking down and coming apart, and barriers between things are, being permeated, and the whole world seems a real mess. And like saying, yeah, this is happening. It's like this, we're being tested, and the other entities out in the universe, the other intelligent beings, they're waiting to see if we can tie our own shoes, before they're going to get in touch with us.
Yeah, but do you honestly think there is some external force that is watching over us and that will act in any way positive or negative, the way we're just messing ourselves up? Does anyone else even care? Even if we had physical beings from another star system that came down here and they looked at us, would they just see in themselves another species going through this nonsense and maybe not surviving? Or would they act, or would anybody even care? I don't think they care.
I don't know. I mean, I guess this is kind of litmus test about your general attitude towards life, So, I mean, who do we have? The smartest guy in the world, Stephen Hawking, telling us, no, don't try to contact the aliens because they're just going to come here and enslave us.
Yeah, careful what you wish for.
But nobody pays attention to him anymore, right? Because he's saying wacky things now, right? So he's a scientist who we revere, but he's starting to say wacky things, so we don't pay so much attention to him anymore. I don't know. I kind of do. Well, one of the things that Wilson, and you said his novels, this novel, The Mind Parasites, which I said was about these psychic vampires in the mind. There's a group of people who learn how to overcome them. And through the process of doing that, they powers and abilities far beyond those of mortal man that had yet,
don't say that.
Yet been available to them, become available, and they are able somehow. This is a science fiction novel. This is a novel. They're able to go out out into space and leave the Earth and all that. And at the very rim of our solar system, they come into contact with another kind of intelligence out there, and basically they're offered, you can come with us, and we can sort of show you, what's up actually out here, and actually, the hero declines because he wants to learn for himself. He wants to develop for himself. So I tend to think, yes, I think there is, how should we say it? In general, I think that there's a grain to the universe and it slowly moves towards the good, but it's a long road to hoe. Things are very difficult. And people say diamond is the hardest material in the world. No, it isn't. Human inertia is the most difficult, most resistant material in the known universe. And we've been working on that for thousands of years, and, look what happened to Jesus, look what happened to Buddha, all these guys. So it's a long road to hoe, but I do think Well, I was going to say it's something like the Watcher. If you know the Watcher from the old Marvel comics.
Sure.
He was this supremely intelligent, powerful being, but he had taken a vow never to interfere in the affairs of other species, much like Star Trek's, the Prime Directive, that kind of thing. But he can kind of help a little bit. He can kind of do a little bit. He can kind of arrange things. And in fact, it's through his machinations that the Fantastic Four eventually, can defeat Galactus in this epic series of issues in about the mid-'60s, maybe 44 to 49 of the Fantastic Four. So it's something like that. I mean, I was going to say that's another big influence on me, along with horror films and science fiction movies and Lovecraft and all that, is the Marvel Comics. I actually belong to the Merry Marvel Marching Society.
Oh, please, nobody is still a member of that. What about Doctor Strange? Because that gets into all the mysticism stuff. Doctor Strange, what were the influences there?
Oh, well, my God. I mean, there you go. I mean, Steve Ditko. I'm glad he finally got some of the credit that he deserved, like Jack Kirby. Not to say Stan Lee shouldn't get the credit, but he seemed to get more in many ways. There was more on his plate than the other guys. But no, Steve Ditko is a weird character because, he was into Ayn Rand. Or is he still alive? I don't really know. Maybe I shouldn't speak in the past tense. But he was a big reader of Ayn Rand. And this was one of the reasons why he left Marvel and other places, because he had these values and principles that he wouldn't compromise.
Just to stop here before we break, we're going to break in a second. Steve Ditko, born in Johnstown, Pennsylvania. He's age 88.
Oh, he's alive.
Great. He's still alive. Well, look, Stan Lee is in his 90s.
I know.
And he's still making cameos in all the shows. We've got Gary Lachman, and it's not just about comic books. Okay, but you have to think about cultural influences. With Gene and Chris, you're in
the Paracast.
Thank you for listening to GCN. Be sure to visit GCNlive.com today.
We also have swag. We have all these exclusive Paracast things that you can buy. We've got 60 or so different items, and entails T-shirts, sleeves for notebook computers, iPad cases, mouse pads, the Paracast Jumbo tote bag, all sorts of T-shirts and jackets and stuff like that for men and women. We have a Paracast aluminum water bottle. All this stuff, you go to store.theparacast.com, store.theparacast.com. What makes it special is that the items are the best quality, great T-shirts, fabrics, and they have our official logo on them. That's what makes them special, in multiple sizes and colors. We even have stuff for children, stuff for women, stuff for men. We have all sorts of sizes, like small up to X large. A lot of good stuff. That's the swag from the Paracast. You go to store.theparacast.com, stop by, and take a shopping tour.
Why be held hostage by your wireless carrier for 2 years? What if you had no contract, no activation fees, no hidden costs, tracking, tracing, harvesting customer data, or draconian gimmicks? All on America's largest 4G LTE, GSM, and Sprint networks. Introducing Pix Wireless. Activate your Sprint, AT&T, or unlock GSM phones with Pix, and choose from an arsenal of monthly plans or build your own. Starting at only $2.99 per month. Get connected now. Call or click 1-866-205-9513 or PixWireless.com, spelled PIXWireless.com. Pick Pix and get connected today.
Want to build a maintenance-free, low and slow charcoal briquette fire that burns for hours for free? MeatMastersRadio.com will show you how to build a low-temp charcoal fire that's guaranteed fiddle-proof. It's easy and free. MeatMastersRadio.com teaches charcoal barbecue skills on new topics every week. Go to MeatMastersRadio.com. That's MeatMastersRadio.com.
You've seen crazy diets to lose weight. At GCN Team, our healthy body weight loss system simply neutralizes the body, bringing down cravings. It has been proven that nutritional deficiencies drive appetite for carbs, sugars, and fats. Lose weight the easy way. Find us at GCNteam.com or call 877-878-4203. Fighting cravings is a fool's game. Give the body what it needs to be satisfied. Again, 877-878-4203. That's 877-878-4203.
Hi, Peter Vaccaro for ParanormalDate.com. Are you looking for love in all the wrong places? Now you have a chance to change that by signing up for free at paranormaldate.com. This incredible dating site puts people of like minds together. People who are interested in the strange, the unusual, mysteries, ghosts, UFOs, and the afterlife, and so much more. ParanormalDate.com was developed for you, people seeking a viable alternative to the other dating services. You can join for free by going to ParanormalDate.com, and if you decide you like it and want to connect with people, use the code GEORGE for a substantial discount. Mark Rawlings, president of ParanormalDate.com, says so many people hunger to share their experiences about the paranormal, the unexplainable, or the afterlife, and so much more, and this is the source for them to meet and share that common interest. So sign up for free at ParanormalDate.com, ParanormalDate.com, and use the code GEORGE if you decide to connect with someone you like.
Has neck, back, or shoulder pain got you down? Go to sunshine-pillows.com and get soothing comfort, support, and pain relief fast. Their microwavable heat therapy pillows and wraps treat neck and shoulder pain, reduce stress, and relax the soul. An ergonomic pillow from Sunshine Pillows supports your head and neck on long trips or when simply resting at home. Be good to yourself. Visit sunshine-pillows.com. Sunshine-pillows.com.
This is Micah Hanks of the Gralien Report, and you're listening to the Paracast, the gold standard of paranormal radio.
Hey, I like that. You know, we're probably going to recruit you.
Okay. I'm up for it.
I want to ask you just briefly. You are a member of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, right?
Yep.
Now, how does that work out? Because you left the band before they became famous, but then you rejoined them for a tour.
Well, he left before they had a record deal.
Well, they did their homework. I mean, I tell you the truth, when friends got in touch with me, this is 10 years ago now, this happened in 2006, friends got in touch with me and told me, hey, Gary, Blondie's being inducted to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and you're included. I said, no, you got to be kidding. I had made my contribution. It is not negligible, but it is small. I recognize that. But no, they did their homework. But it turned out to be a scandal at the time. And I'll use up a couple minutes just telling the story where it was at the Waldorf Astoria, 2006. And they have the ceremony and all that kind of thing. But Debbie, she didn't really want to share, as far as I understand, the podium or anything else with ex-members. And she didn't want to have anything to do with us and any of that kind of thing. But I have to hand it to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame people. They did their homework. They knew the right thing to do. And somebody at that evening got myself, Frank Infante, and Nigel aside and said, look, no matter what happens, you guys are up there. We'll get you up there. We're not going to allow this to happen where you don't take part in this. And so we were up there. But it was kind of like, the stage ain't big enough for all of us kind of attitude once we get up there. And everyone has, a few minutes to kind of say their thing and thank everybody and all that. And at one point, Frank Infante, who's another guy from Jersey contributed immensely to the New York rock scene. I have to say that. He said to Debbie, "Oh, come on, Deb, for old time's sake, can't we just all play a tune together?" And she said, "No, Frank, can't you see I brought my band with me?" And he said, "Your band? I thought Blondie was getting inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame." And the place went quiet. And all this is being filmed, for television and all that. And this big ballroom in the Waldorf Astoria. And nobody knew what was going on. Everyone thought, well, this was a joke. And then they realized, actually, this is like Family Feud. It's like really nasty stuff happening here. She wouldn't let us play and all that. And that was the scandal of the evening. The other scandal of the evening was the Sex Pistols. They were supposed to be inducted. But instead of showing up, John Lydon or Johnny Rotten just sent a letter saying, we piss on the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. You guys are full of, I guess, was that a 4-letter word? I'm sorry. But the next day in all the gossip columns, they were saying about Debbie, heart of crass or something like that, because it was kind of like she just made it so obvious that she wasn't interested in the rest of the guys. But hey, you know what? I never thought I'd ever get there. So what can I say?
Well, congratulations! You're out of 500 guests. You're our first member of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame to be on the show.
There you go. Well,
you may be the last one, but we're certainly happy to have you aboard. Let me just ask you a final question before we go back to UFOs and the occult and Colin Wilson and everything. Are you at all in touch with any existing or former members of Blondie anymore, or is that just all over with?
No, I mean, no, to put it that way. I mean, there was some acrimonious, and then there's all the usual things that happens, money disputes and things like that, and royalties and so on and so on. But no, the last time I saw any of them was 10 years ago when we did the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So that was it. But,
Well, Jimmy and Clem always seem to be really, really, just kind of aw shucks kind of guys. Clem a little less so, but Jimmy was a sweetheart.
Yeah, no, they're all nice. I mean, Clem I went to high school with. I used to I carried Clem's drums into like the school dance somewhere, So, I mean, I know him. God, how old am I now? I'm not going to tell you for real, but I know him for a really long time. But things happen, and I don't hold any hard feelings or anything like that. And the little, what should we say? The little digs I took, not at him, but at Chris and Debbie are in my book, New York Rocker. So it's a good read. It's a really good read about the time, and it tells you what that time was like.
I just ordered it, by the way.
Oh, there you go. There you go. All right.
I just as we've been on the show here, I went ahead and I've been meaning to do it for a while, and today was a perfect opportunity to do it and not forget.
Well, it's probably like a penny or something on Amazon these days.
Oh no, it's the used copies are up there, but it's more than that. But one thing I must say before we move on is, I have known a number of people that have, made it in various fields, and success does change people, and it does place friendships in sometimes an uncomfortable new place. Oftentimes uncomfortable for the people that are dealing with someone that's become successful, which kind of makes the problem doubly bad, because then that puts more tension and stress into the relationship that maybe shouldn't even have to be there to begin with. And I can say that Debbie was notoriously kind of diva-ish in her own way, and it's amazing that Chris and her were able to last as business partners as long as they did and still remain friends. As not to mention having a very, very close and heavy relationship for many years. With Chris almost dying and stuff, and Debbie sticking by him, and so you gotta admire him for that. But success changes people.
I mean, at different times, there was a long stretch when I wasn't involved in that world or writing, and I lived in LA, and I was working at a metaphysical bookshop. It's not there anymore. A place called the Bodhi Tree.
Oh, the Bodhi Tree, yeah.
So it was very well known, and they were in town recording, and they came into the shop to say hello and to invite me down to the recording session, and I wound up singing backup vocals in some track called Bad Boys. I forget which album it's on, but it's like, cool. Oh God, everybody in the shop is like, oh my God, look who's here, and all that kind of thing. But no, I mean, you're right. It does. Things do change. Things happen, and it's the standard kind of story where you're all friends and banded together in the early days when you're in the trenches and you're struggling and you're starving and you're making it happen, and then the suits show up. And then they dangle success before your eyes, and then all that kind of stuff happens. So I have no regrets. In fact, Chris Stein saved my life once. I tell the story in New York Rocker. It was in this loft we were living in, and the short version is they picked up a lamp once, and there was a short in it, and I was being electrocuted. And I couldn't move, and I couldn't speak, and I couldn't do anything, and I couldn't let go of the lamp. Had he not walked out of the back of the loft and seen what was happening and casually walked over and just pulled the plug, who knows where I would be today. So wow. I have to thank him for that. So no matter what happens.
So after that, maybe today he'd say, I should not have done that.
Serves me right for getting the free electricity from the liquor store. Anyway, but Yeah.
Right. Well, hopefully that grounded you, Gary.
I was shaking. That's good.
Okay, getting back to the subject at hand, Colin Wilson, and the daunting task of attempting to. Yeah.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
But I did ask a question before Gene kind of interrupted us when we went to break. I was real interested to know how, what prompted you to tackle such a such a monumental task. I mean, that's no easy feat. I can't think of many writers that it would be more difficult to try to really get inside their heads and present the reader with, a coherent look at such a kaleidoscope of subjects that he covered. There were, as you mentioned, threads that wound through most of his work, but just the sheer output and the sheer depth of brilliance. And the guy really did have a very unique way of looking at people, places, and things and events. And I, I'm just very curious of how you convinced yourself to go ahead and tackle that. Or maybe you were just bribed by your publisher and they said, do a book about this guy.
No, I mean, it was a labor of love, really, because, as I said, his books got me on all of this in the first place. And then I start the book with telling a story of how I made this pilgrimage down to where he lived in Cornwall. And that was 1983. And I had already by that time read lots of his books, been in and out of rock and roll, was enjoying this wonderful couple years I had when I left music, and my song President's Dear had done very well. So I actually had some income from the royalties, and I could do what I wanted basically for a time. And what I did was read a lot, tried to write, which I wasn't very good at that point. And then I traveled, and a friend of mine, we went to Europe on this kind of mini search for the miraculous. And we went to places like Chartres Cathedral, Notre Dame de Paris.
We're going to have more on the search for the miraculous, but we have to have this miraculous announcement. With Gary, Gene, and Chris, you're in
the Paracast.
Thank you for listening to GCN. Visit GCNlive.com today.
Attack of the Rockoids has been well received by critics and readers alike. It's a thrill-a-minute story you'll never forget. A former U.S. military intelligence officer is haunted by intense dreams about a beautiful woman pleading for his help after a terrible battle in outer space. But the dreams turn out to be true and thrust him into a telepathic love affair with a woman whose faraway planet is intent on destroying the Earth. And now the gripping tale continues in The Coming of the Protectors. It's the second book of the Rockoids trilogy, a galaxy-spanning adventure that pits our hapless heroes against powerful, fanatical enemies that threaten the lives of freedom-loving beings everywhere. Attack of the Rockoids and The Coming of the Protectors. Classic science fiction at its best, available now. For more details, visit rockoids.com. That's ROCKOIDS.com.
Diabetes is at war with your circulatory system. Fight back with Cardivite. Cardivite is a dietary supplement containing powerful herbs for circulation and healthy cardiac function. Improve your energy, stamina, and mental acuity. Reduce swelling, cold hands, and risk of amputation. Get your blood flowing with Cardivite. This 5-star rated product was developed by a diabetic pharmacist and is available online at www.getbloodflowing.com. That's www.getbloodflowing.com.
There is an affordable alternative to the high cost of healthcare that offers freedom from insurance while providing compliance with the Obamacare individual mandate. Imagine having access to quality, affordable healthcare that allows you the freedom to choose your doctor and hospital. Members can share up to 100% of necessary medical expenses, including some alternative treatments. Find out how you and your family can contain healthcare costs without giving up your freedom. Go to libertyoncall.org. That's libertyoncall.org.
Welcome back to the Paracast, the gold standard of paranormal radio. And now, here's Gene Steinberg.
That was our miraculous announcement. We've got one more for you. We have a second radio show after the Paracast. If you want to hear that show, you've got to be a member of the Paracast Plus at plus.theparacast.com. That's where you get all the information. We give you the commercial-free version of this show, lots of benefits for a modest subscription rate. Our price, cheap. Plus.theparacast.com. Miraculous Times with Gary Lachman. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, so I was saying it was 1983. I was in Europe with a friend of mine, and we were on this kind of mini search of the miraculous, and we went to places like Chartres Cathedral in France, and we also found in Fontainebleau, which is outside of Paris, where Gurdjieff, this esoteric teacher from the 20s and 30s I mentioned earlier, had this Institute of the Harmonious Development of Man. So we found this place where he had it in the forest in Fontainebleau, and we went to Glastonbury and Stonehenge and so on. But someplace I wanted to go, part of this search of my own, was to go meet Colin Wilson. And he lived, as I said before, he had moved down to the very end, the westernmost tip of England in Cornwall in the late 50s. And when I went down there in 1983, he was very friendly. Someone had given me his phone number. I forget exactly how I got it. Somebody, probably a bookseller in London. And I called him from a phone box in Penzance, and he was very friendly and said, yes, please come by. And yes, you can stay, you can stay the night and all that. And then I went there and had this wonderful evening with him where he was explaining his ideas about consciousness to me and how it relates to, different areas of existentialism and other philosophy. I really felt at the end of a heavily wine-fueled evening that I had grasped it. I really had got my hands around it. But the next morning when I woke up, it had slipped through my fingers. And then I carried on a correspondence with him after that. What had happened was that he became a kind of mentor, for me. He was I was a fan, became an acquaintance, then a friend. I visited him different times down in Cornwall. Whenever he would come to LA, where I was living at the time, to give a talk or something, we would meet up. At one point, he actually stayed with me when I was house sitting in this wonderful place that I call the Zen Castle up in the Hollywood Hills. It was owned by one of the owners of the Bodhi Tree, this metaphysical bookshop I worked in, and they were on holiday, and they asked me to house sit, and I did. And Wilson was coming there to give a talk, and I said, well, why don't you stay with me? And I have this great, huge place. So he did. So I got to know him very well, and his ideas really influenced all of my own books, all of my own ideas. And I think I've made that pretty clear in my books over the years. But I didn't feel I could write a full-length book about him, basically until he passed away. And I don't feel he obliged me by doing that so that I could actually write the book. But when it actually happened, I don't say it so much in the book itself, but I wrote an article about this, that when I heard about his passing, I was in Amsterdam, or I was in the Netherlands. I was giving a talk at a conference there. And then when it was confirmed that, he had died, I really felt bereft. I felt like a hole, that kind of emotional intensity that you feel about people that are very close to you. And that's how I felt. And other people knew him as well. I wasn't the only one. He had many, many fans. Many, many people visited him. Their home down in Cornwall was a kind of site of pilgrimage for many people. And he knew lots and lots of people. So I wasn't in an exceptional case in any way. But there was just something about his ideas that really, grabbed me. And what I wanted to do in the book was to show, actually, there is one linchpin holding together all the different books he writes about crime. He wrote much, much, much about crime. He wrote wonderful books about crime, the history of crime. Fantastic book called The Criminal History of Mankind, which you could devote a whole episode to, about the occult, about the paranormal, about literature, about philosophy, about psychology, about sex, and so many other things. But there's a single kind of thing that holds it all together, and it's this question of freedom and what he calls, at the beginning of the occult, the paradoxical nature of freedom. Now, freedom is something that, when it's threatened, we know exactly how valuable it is and how important it is, and we will fight tooth and nail, body and soul, to hold on to it or to regain it. But the weird thing about us is that once the crisis is past, once we have regained the freedom again, we invariably, against our best efforts, slip into this kind of taking it for granted. We kind of lose hold of why it's important. And this is the existential dilemma. This is why we go through life, most of our lives, in this kind of half-asleep state. And it's only when crisis faces us or some other, shocking, demanding kind of thing that we kind of wake up and say, oh my God, what's really happening here? What's going on with that? That's what he devoted his mind to and trying to analyze in all these different books. And he came up with a way he felt was a means of kind of working against this kind of inner lethargy, this kind of inner boredom, this kind of devaluing of our experience that we unconsciously perform all the time. And that's what I wanted to get across to the readers of my book.
Freedom is something that, at least in this country, is number one, people really don't understand what it means. And even if they did, they'd still be in that place of taking it for granted, not really appreciating the wonderful freedoms that we still have in this country, even though they're being degraded daily. And we're seeing some real disturbing movement towards more of an authoritarian, system. But that's a very good point. I never really thought of his work. I understand completely what you're saying, but as a unifying principle, it's a little bit eye-opening for me to hear that actually echoed throughout his work, which, of course, I'm not totally familiar with. I've only read maybe 10 of his books, maybe 8, 10. So that's a very good point, and I do think it's a point that should be underscored in what may be the cusp of interesting times that might feature a little less freedom than we're used to.
No, this is true. I mean, I'm saying the idea when freedom is something that's physically threatened, we all know how important it is. He in the beginning of the occult, he says about how when the tanks rolled into Warsaw or something like that, everyone knew exactly what freedom was, and it was very clear and clean. And he says it's something. It was rather like the silver that a burglar was coming to steal. We knew it was something we wanted. But when we don't have that threat, it all becomes kind of misty and vague. So you have these characters, these existential characters like Meursault in Camus' book, The Stranger, who sort of sleepwalks through this whole life that he has. And he somehow, through no actual decision of his own, winds up shooting somebody on this beach, and then finds himself in prison and about to be kind of executed for a murder. And he's sleptwalked through everything. And it's only at the very end where the reality of his situation has come to him that he actually feels a kind of intensity of being. And this is the kind of thing that Wilson this is what attracted him to Gurdjieff and other kind of philosophers of this. It's this kind of sense of being. He likes to quote from the German philosopher Martin Heidegger, this phrase, the triviality of everydayness. The kind of everyday routine kind of blunts our appreciation of everything. This is why he wrote about crime a lot. He said a lot of criminals, in fact, a lot of murders take place because the person perpetrating them has so dull a sense of their own being that they need some kind of radical act to kind of feel alive. For the few seconds that, this violence erupts in them, they feel a kind of intensity of being that they never felt their whole life. Now, of course, it's more than unfortunate. It's tragic. It's horrific that they're driven to this. But again, the same kind of things that say, he talks about, I mentioned earlier, Hermann Hesse. One of the great examples of this is Hesse's novel Steppenwolf, which was, very big in the late 60s and 70s. And obviously the band Steppenwolf took their name from it and all that. And the Steppenwolf character is someone who has external freedom. He doesn't have obligations and responsibilities. He has enough money to live on his own. He could do what he wants. He can spend his days reading or listening to music or anything like that. But he feels this encroaching kind of boredom and ennui coming over him all the time. And his freedom becomes a burden. And if you know the novel, the beginning of it, he's walking around, deciding when to go back home, when to slit his throat. But what happens is that he stops at a cafe, has a glass of wine, and suddenly this kind of experience happens to him, this freedom experience we can have. Suddenly he's reminded of his freedom. It becomes real to him again. We all really have this freedom. Our problem is that we don't really grab that we have it most of the time. We tend to need some kind of crisis, some kind of threat, something to shock us into feeling it. And Wilson wanted to find a way to be able to do that without having to go through these inordinate means of doing it, like the threat of suicide. And he always tells the story of the writer Graham Greene, who as a teenager felt this excruciating boredom.
We've got Gary Lachman and Gene and Chris. You're in
the Paracast.
The award-winning graphic converter, the universal genius for photo editing on your Mac. Join over 1.5 million loyal users for this Swiss Army knife photo editing app. It gives you all you expect from a top-flight image editing app with tons of features, and most important, it's easy to use. Get 20% off from lemkeysoft.de/Gene. That's lemkesoft.de/Gene. As you know, neighbors, web hosting can be pretty cheap, but not all hosting is the same. DreamHost wins Best of Awards year after year. You get unlimited disk space, unlimited bandwidth, and even the low-cost plans put your sites on high-performance SSDs. Want to know more about what DreamHost has to offer? Go to technightowl.com/host. Once again, that's technightowl.com/host.
Will the government protect your family from Iran and North Korea's newest weapon, EMP? We buy guns to protect ourselves, home, health, and car insurance for accidents. Maybe you also have food storage. But how would you keep your refrigerator running in a long-term EMP blackout? Using tested military designs, the Solarc EMP-hardened solar generator protects and powers your critical appliances for years without burying items underground or wrapping them in aluminum foil. Unlike other preps, Solarc is used every day to help offset your electric bill automatically. Visit PortableSolarLLC.com to learn how easily expandable the system is. Solarc is the most affordable and powerful solution on the market. The whole system even fits in the back of a pickup or SUV and can install in less than an hour. See for yourself why Solarc beats other off-grid systems at PortableSolarLLC.com. Don't wait for the government. Go to PortableSolarLLC.com to learn why Solarc is energy insurance for your family.
Paid non-attorney spokesperson Adam Pulaski of the Pulaski Law Firm with principal office in Houston, Texas is the attorney responsible for the content of this ad. This ad is not legal advice, and the choice of a lawyer should not be based solely upon advertisement. Services may not be available in all states. Attention Xarelto users. If you or a loved one took Xarelto and suffered a serious bleeding event, you may be entitled to financial compensation. Xarelto is a popular prescription blood thinner used to prevent blood clots and protect patients from strokes. These serious bleeding events have led to numerous cases of hospitalization and even death. Phone lines are open 24/7. Call 800-261-0937. That's 800-261-0937.
You're fired. According to the Small Business Administration, 75% of small businesses plan to eliminate jobs or reduce workers' hours to part-time. You're fired. According to Gallup, the unemployment rate recently jumped to nearly 9%, and the underemployment rate hit a staggering 17.9%. You're fired. 1 out of 3 young adults and 1 out of 2 recent college graduates are underemployed. Hello, I'm Keith Abel, a pharmacist and a home business entrepreneur. In 2011, I became one of those statistics myself. Instead of looking for another job in corporate America, I joined Dr. Joel Wallach, the Dead Doctors Don't Lie guy. We're creating steady incomes for ourselves and would like to show you how to do the same. If you want to supplement your current income, replace your income, so you don't have to become one of the statistics, then give me a call toll-free at 866-257-3105, 866-257-3105. You're fired. Don't wait till you hear those words. Start creating an extra income today. 866-257-3105.
By now you know that wireless technology like cell phones do in fact pose dangers to the health and privacy of everyone. Blockit Pocket's wide range of products are unmatched in providing the protection you deserve. No scare tactics, just common sense. BlockitPocket.com offers quality American-made options to alleviate and eliminate these invisible dangers. Learn more at BlockitPocket.com or call 888-315-9618. BlockitPocket.com, enhancing health and privacy.
We'd like to hear from you. If you have a comment or question about the Paracast, send it to news@theparacast.com. That's news@theparacast.com. And don't forget to visit our famous Paracast community forums at forum.theparacast.com.
We're immersed in a lot of fascinating discussions here for the final 3 segments of the Paracast with Gary Lachman, talking about Colin Wilson and so many different subjects to get into. Go ahead, please.
I was going to say, I was telling you a story of the writer Graham Greene, as a famous British writer. When he was a teenager, he suffered this excruciating boredom so badly that he was driven to play Russian roulette. He came across a revolver that his older brother had stashed away somewhere. And what he did was that he took the revolver, he put one bullet in one of the chambers, spun the whole thing, and put it to his head. And then when the hammer clicked on an empty chamber and he didn't blow his brains out, he suddenly had this enormous experience of well-being. And everything suddenly became interesting. Everything that he was bored to tears with 5 minutes ago suddenly became infinitely interesting to him. From that, Wilson concludes that what had happened? The world didn't change. It was always there. The infinite possibilities that Green was able to suddenly see had always been there. He was blind to them. Why was he blind to them? Well, because his consciousness had been so dull. It had been so limp. It was as if he was trying to pick up things, with his hands just like covered in butter. He couldn't grab hold of anything. And suddenly the threat of instant annihilation wakes him up. And he kind of does this kind of concentration. And suddenly that's what happens. So Wilson is basically trying to say, like, well, yes, we are all like Graham Greene in some way. We all undervalue our experience, and it's only under threat that we can feel its true value. Is there some way we can feel that true value without putting a gun to our head? That's what his philosophy is about.
Wow. Another thing that I'm seeing here, looking through this incredible list of books authored by Wilson, he did quite a number of biographies, and there seems to be a pretty consistent thread throughout the biographies that kind of dovetail with his interests that he would address, in his other books. Do you have any particular favorites that you could recommend to our listeners? Because when we have an author on who's done a biography of someone as prolific as Wilson, it's always good to give people, if they're interested, a sense of where's a good starting point. And I think some of the biographies might be a good place for people to kind of get into his writing style and his thinking.
Well, yeah, I mean, he wrote biographies of Bernard Shaw, and he wrote a biography of Rudolf Steiner. So that gives you a kind of, idea of his range. I mean, Bernard Shaw was one of the great, playwrights of the earlier 20th century. He's not quite as revered as he was at one point, but he was a world famous kind of figure. Rudolf Steiner is an Austrian kind of polymath who developed this, depending on how you look at it, rather strange spiritual philosophy, and he's also behind many of the Waldorf or Steiner schools that are this alternative education. Wilson was always attracted to ideas, and he was attracted to the people who had the ideas and how they faced the kind of challenges that he talks about in his book, The Outsider. Mm-hmm. And he's very interested in people's development, how they face, the development of growing, the challenges life presents to you. Do you recoil from them? Do you embrace them? Do you run away from them? Do you run into them head on? So he wrote books about people like Jung, Gurdjieff, Uspensky, who was Gurdjieff's kind of lieutenant, and I've written a biography of as well because I think he deserves more credit than he gets in most of the books written about Gurdjieff and all of that. He did a biography of Wilhelm Reich.
Oh, very good one too, I might add.
Yeah, exactly. Steiner, Aleister Crowley. He's mostly interested in people and their ideas, and I mean, reading one of his biographies, it's as much a book about Wilson on these people than it is, wholly about them. So you obviously get his take, but he's always engaging with their ideas. And what he does is he engages with them in a kind of discussion. They're not around anymore, obviously, to talk with them. Perhaps now, when they're all in the next bardo, they're all kind of, banging it out amongst themselves and, having a good old conversation there. This is one of the things I've always liked about his writing. I think one of the best things he does is write about other writers, write about other thinkers, because he really tries to understand what they're saying, what they're proposing, and then he meets it with his own ideas. But I would say if someone coming to Wilson for the first time, if you really want to get a flavor of what he's like, The Occult is a very good start, or the follow-up that came out in the late 70s called Mysteries, which was The Occult is a kind of history of the occult and takes you back, starts sort of Stone Age and brings you up to contemporary times. Mysteries was about what was happening then.
Right. In the 70s. My first two Wilson books. Funny you should mention in order.
I mean, when I was on that little mini search of the miraculous that I mentioned earlier, that was the one book I had with me, was Mysteries, because at the time I got really into earth magic and ley lines and standing stones and all that. That was very popular at that point. And I went around to all these sites with that book because he devotes a few chapters to that kind of thing. But there's so much in there, out of the body experiences, the tarot, magic, ESP. He just brought everything together. And his books are kind of encyclopedia of both the subject and also what people were thinking about it at the time. And I think he's really responsible in many ways for making it at the time in the early 70s a respectable, subject of study. Because you have people like, say, Arthur Koestler, who was a well-known political writer and a science writer. And he came out in the early 70s writing about ESP in his book called The Roots of Coincidence. And when he died, and he was very, very successful, he left a large bequest to a university to establish a chair in parapsychology. And I think it went to a university in Edinburgh to do that.
Well, I see a parallel with your output as well. You've written some very good biographies, the list of them. I mean, Jung, Madame Blavatsky, Swedenborg, Crowley, as you mentioned prior. There's Ouspensky, Steiner. You kind of have a similar approach, too, where you're throwing change-ups in there by featuring, writers and thinkers that have been influential in your process. And I think that's, for all writers out there, that's always a good way to, I think, focus not only your own ideas, but focus on how those ideas have developed and how your thinking has progressed based on the kinds of minds that you can appreciate and identify with. So I think that's a bit of a testament to your ability to spread around and let your readers kind of have more of an inside track on your development. And I think that's very good.
No, absolutely. I mean, I'm very happy I have had an opportunity to write about these people because one thing, it allows me to kind of put my ideas together about them. Okay, this is what I've got from Jung, and this is where I see what's important about him. And clearly other people will have got other things and see other things. So it's all part of that conversation. But it's, it allows me to say, okay, yeah, this is what I got, and I can take this and bring it on to the next thing. And
the next thing, ladies and gentlemen, consists of several minutes of necessary business, because that's how radio works. Unless you have, of course, a membership in Paracast Plus, and you won't hear them. Plus.theparacast.com if you're interested. Gary, Gene, Chris, you're in
the Paracast.
Thank you for listening to GCN. Visit GCNlive.com today.
This is Dan Pilla. Do you owe the IRS money you can't pay? Are tax debts crippling you? I've defended people from the IRS for over 30 years. I've helped thousands, and I can help you too. I wrote the book on IRS settlement, and I'm telling you, there's no such thing as a hopeless case. Call 800-34-NO-TAX to finally get free of IRS debt. With the IRS's new programs, there's never been a better time to solve your problem. Call 800-34-NO-TAX. That's 800-34-NO-TAX, or my website, danpilla.com.
Worried about lead, fluoride, and other contaminants in your drinking water? Get a ProPure with the Pro 1G 2.0 cleanable reusable filter and remove up to 200 contaminants. Drink water the way nature meant it to be. Clean, crisp, and refreshing. See the complete line of ProPure products, including the new ProMax shower filter. There's a ProPure for you. Visit your authorized ProPure dealer for details or ProPureUSA.com. That's ProPureUSA.com.
Are you happy washing your hands with harsh chemicals? Are you happy doing laundry with detergents? Are you happy paying high prices? Find your happiness with Pure Soap. These all-natural, earth-friendly Pure Soaps are the very best you've ever used. Buy in bulk. Get a 12, 36, or 48-month supply, or get items individually and still save big. You're getting soap products twice as good as what you're using now, earth-friendly and natural soaps. Your family deserves the best. Happiness is 5starsoap.com. Why not put your money up the drain for a change? See them at 5starsoap.com or call 1-800-340-7091 for a catalog. Cal Ben Soap Company can save you thousands of dollars and give you good old-fashioned real soaps that are triple concentrated. Soaps made from vegetable and coconut oils. See their full selection of soaps at 5starsoap.com. That's F-I-V-E starsoap.com. Or call 1-800-340-7091 for a catalog.
Hi, Peter Vaccaro for ParanormalDate.com. Are you looking for love in all the wrong places? Now you have a chance to change that by signing up for free at ParanormalDate.com. This incredible dating site puts people of like minds together. People who are interested in the strange, the unusual, mysteries, ghosts, UFOs, and the afterlife, and so much more. ParanormalDate.com was developed for you, people seeking a viable alternative to the other dating services. You can join for free by going to ParanormalDate.com, and if you decide you like it and want to connect with people, use the code GEORGE for a substantial discount. Mark Rawlings, president of ParanormalDate.com, says so many people hunger to share their experiences about the paranormal, the unexplainable, or the afterlife, and so much more, and this is the source for them to meet and share that common interest. So sign up for free at ParanormalDate.com, ParanormalDate.com, and use the code GEORGE if you decide to connect with someone you like.
Are you tired of commuting to a job that makes someone else rich, working harder than ever, but getting nowhere? Do you hate spending hundreds of dollars every week on daycare, having someone else raise your children? With our opportunities, you can start earning money as soon as next week. You get to be the boss, work from home, and live a happier life. At Be the Boss Network, you'll find hundreds of work-from-home opportunities that you can literally start today and be earning money as soon as next week. Go to freedom106.com and start earning money as soon as next week. You get to be the boss. Get out of the rat race. Work from home. Go to freedom106.com right now and change your life today. That's freedom, the number 106.com. Go to freedom106.com and start earning money as soon as next week. You be the boss. Go to freedom106.com.
This is Kurt Sutherland, the author of UFO Mysteries, and you're listening to the Paracast.
Now, I don't know how good Gary Lachman was in the recording studio, but he does all those little stingers in one take. Were you one take, Gary?
Pretty good in the studio. I was pretty good in the studio.
So you were a one-take wonder in the studio then?
Yes, I was. Well, we had one great one take was the very first Blondie recording. It's a song called Ex Offender that I wrote music for, and Debbie wrote the lyrics. But I actually play the guitars. I play guitar in that track. So even though I was a bassist, I played guitar. That was one of the reasons why I had to leave the band, because I wanted to play guitar more. But there's this there's a kind of Dick Dale surf guitar solo in the song, and I did that in one take, but it was recorded in the hallway of Radio City Music Hall because they wanted to get this echo sound. So they had the amp, me playing at one end of this hall, and the mic then at the other end of it. So it was a one-take wonder. Yeah.
I wish I could say that. I have had my moments, but generally I would have to work out a little bit.
Well, it wasn't very difficult what I was playing, so.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I had a tendency to put a little bit more pressure on myself than I needed to, which is generally how it goes. You're not much worried about everything else.
My background in rock and roll has actually helped me in my new career because I give lots of talks.
Right.
And I never feel uncomfortable or stage fright or anything like that because I figure, I played in front of 80,000 people a few times.
Wow.
So having a crowd of 50 or 60 or 100 or so is
everything kind of pales in comparison when you think about that. Playing for a festival is, I guess once it gets to a point where there's so many people, it's almost like they're not there, even though they do make a lot of noise.
Absolutely, that's really the case. I remember. I'm sorry, we're going down rock and roll memory lane again, but one show when I was playing with Iggy, we opened for the Rolling Stones at the Silver Dome in Detroit.
Oh my God!
And you can't see anything. It's just black in front of you. But then they hated us. They weren't there to see Iggy Pop. They were there to see
God. That's
and
even worse.
They threw everything they could possibly get their hands on at us. So out of this darkness, you suddenly see like sneakers flying, at you.
Jeez, how disconcerting.
I always wonder when they throw things like that, do they come by backstage after and say, "Can I have that back?"
Well, on that show, what happened was Bill Graham, one of the great, rock promoters, what he did was he had somebody collect everything that was thrown at us. And then before the Stones came on, he went out with Iggy Pop and they read off. There's 25 Bic lighters. there are, 16 combs. They just read off everything that was thrown at us. So, and there was money. People threw money at us, quarters and things like that.
Quarters, that could be dangerous. But if they're throwing, rolled up C notes, that would be great.
No, it was pretty. I mean, but there was a couple bottles. There were a couple bottles. So it was a dangerous business.
Yeah.
Well, especially if you're the opening act and people pay good money for tickets to see a certain band. Yeah. Whoever opens for them, however good they are, you're really getting the short end there, aren't you?
True. But I tell you, I have a secret that I was told at different times to keep to myself. But at that show, I went out into the audience when the Stones were playing because I actually had never seen them, perform. So I was watching them. And then I could see that behind them, there was actually another band. Stones are playing, and then behind a partition, there was another band playing. And I figured it out because that's why Keith Richards or Ronnie Wood could, at different times, take their hands off the guitar and kind of just start clapping, over their heads and stuff like that. And the song would keep going. So they kind of had another band behind them, kind of keeping the rhythm going.
They had ringers?
I swear to God, this was true.
Well, now we're not talking the Monkees in 65 here.
I'm not saying they didn't play at all, but it seemed like there was another band back there keeping the rhythm going. So Ron and Keith could kind of, groove.
In what year was this?
1981.
Yeah, Keith
and I have to say, the other band on the bill was Santana. So,
Wow, what a great show.
Yeah, that's back in the day.
Well, Santana didn't need to have a band behind him other than the one he played with. But, it's interesting about the Monkees, though. It's kind of crazy here because they all played guitar. David Jones didn't play an instrument, but the other three played guitar. But they had to put Mickey Dolenz on drums because they needed a drummer.
Yeah, I know. Well, they were kind of the first Sex Pistols. They were invented, right? And then they kind of came out and did their own thing and all that.
Even with the death of David Jones, they came out with a new album. Mike Nesmith still performs with them occasionally.
Yeah.
It's kind of cool that they can do it at 70 years old.
Absolutely. And Head has got to be one of the strangest films ever made.
Yeah.
I mean, if you haven't seen that film,
that's definitely worth the Netflix. Yeah,
a double bill would be that film and performance, and that'll say something really about the tail end of the 60s.
Yeah, the performance was a rather
very, very dark film.
Very, very, very dark. Yeah, Anita Pallenberg was quite an interesting character.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, there's all myths around that too, that nobody came out of that alive, as it were, because apparently she became addicted. I forget the actress's name who plays this kind of androgynous, character. You're not quite sure whether it's a boy or a girl. Apparently, she came to a bad end. James Fox, who's the only real actor in the film, the story was that he was actually dosed, while it was being made.
Right.
And such a bad experience that he gave up acting after that and became a born-again Christian for a while. And obviously David Campbell, wound up, the filmmaker wound up blowing his brains out. So yeah, there's a dark, again, this was kind of the dark, sinister side of the occult that was attached to this kind of weird stuff that's going on in the 60s that I talk about in my book, Turn Off Your Mind and all that. So it's this kind of, strange, weird kind of milieu there.
Yeah, there's other examples too of bands and celebrity types, actors that have a string of very bad luck after being publicly identified as having interest in the occult, and it's someone should write a book about that sometime because there's some good ones.
Probably is. I mean, there's that book Season of the Witch that is a good book about the occult and rock and all that. So.
Yeah, and also the number of people that have a more than a passing interest in the occult that you would never imagine that they're able to keep any mention or reference to that interest well out of sight of the public. There's quite a number of people that would surprise you.
Oh yeah, I mean, well,
maybe not you, but it would surprise a lot of people.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, like somebody like Ronald Reagan, he had a real interest in it and all that kind of thing. He's not the first person you would think, to be someone interested in that kind of thing. So I know it's there. I mean, how what it means and actually what it leads to is another question. But the fact that they actually have the interest is something that's.
But politicians can't be interested in anything that isn't material.
It's true. It's true. Well, who knows about Trump? Who knows what's going to come out of the closet with him or whatever.
Well, he watched short attention span theater or something.
Being here for 20 years, the United States looks really, really increasingly strange.
Yeah, I can imagine, especially coming from a New York area, and watching the the various pitfalls and pratfalls and trials and tribulations of Trump and any politician from New York, really.
Yeah. No.
The problem you see there is with the mainstream media, not lamestream, the mainstream media. These are big corporations that are appealing to the widest number of people, getting the best ratings, and they dumb down everything. And because they dumb down anything, when you start getting into abstracts about any particular person, a politician, a rock star, anything, that's way, way, way above their heads, at least in terms of what they want to tell you about. We've got more to come with Gary Lachman and Gene and Chris. You're in
the Paracast.
You are listening to GCN. Visit GCNlive.com today.
We also have swag. We have all these exclusive Paracast things that you can buy. We've got 60 or so different items, and entails t-shirts, sleeves for notebook computers, iPad cases, mouse pads, the Paracast Jumbo tote bag, all sorts of t-shirts and jackets and stuff like that for men and women. We have a Paracast aluminum water bottle. All this stuff, you go to store.theparacast.com, store.theparacast.com. What makes it special is that the items are the best quality, great t-shirts, fabrics, and they have our official logo on them. That's what makes them special, in multiple sizes and colors. We even have stuff for children, stuff for women, stuff for men. We have all sorts of sizes, like small up to X large. A lot of good stuff. That's the swag from the Paracast. You go to store.theparacast.com, stop by, and take a shopping tour.
Diabetes is at war with your circulatory system. Fight back with Cardivite. Cardivite is a dietary supplement containing powerful herbs for circulation and healthy cardiac function. Improve your energy, stamina, and mental acuity. Reduce swelling, cold hands, and risk of amputation. Get your blood flowing with Cardivite. This 5-star rated product was developed by a diabetic pharmacist and is available online at www.getbloodflowing.com. That's www.getbloodflowing.com.
How confident are you in your food storage? If it was all you had to rely on, would it sustain your family? Hard times, good times, or any time, NuManna storable food is the proven superior choice. Learn for yourself what happened when one man ate only NuManna storable food for an entire month. Online at powerprepper.com. That's powerprepper.com. Experience the NuManna difference.
American-made food stores I love to eat. Yum!
Hunters, anglers, campers, and survivalists. Get back to nature. Expand your horizons with the highest quality, most versatile, unique slingshots and sling bows on the market at slingbow.com. Slingbow products are compact and models start from just $17.98. They're perfect for your bug out bag or storing in your vehicle. Give yourself and your loved ones the excitement and tradition of Slingbow, a new frontier in archery and truly modern twist on this primitive survival tool. Feel the thrill only at slingbow.com.
Dangerous blood clot device alert. If you or a loved one had an IVC filter placed to prevent blood clots from traveling to your heart or lungs and suffered an injury, you may be entitled to substantial financial compensation. The FDA warns that IVC filters may cause serious complications, such as heart or lung damage, internal bleeding, and even death. These dangerous blood clot devices can break, and the metal fragments can travel to your heart or lungs, causing serious injuries. If you or a loved loved one suffered organ damage or other injuries from an IVC filter, you may be entitled to substantial financial compensation. Act now. Time is limited to file a claim. For a free consultation and free information, call Injury Help Desk at 800-478-1507. 800-478-1507. 800-478-1507. This is an advertisement. Paid non-attorney spokesperson. InjuryHelpDesk.com is responsible for this advertisement. Principal office, Las Vegas, Nevada.
In these uncertain times, it makes sense to have a sustainable backup method to cook food and boil water. If your current plan includes using a fuel-burning stove or cooking over an open fire, then there's a much better way. The Minuteman Rocket Stove is a biomass-burning cooking stove that only requires small quantities of sticks and twigs for fuel. The Minuteman stove is easy to use, smokeless, portable, powerful, and sustainable. For the finest in survival cooking stoves and fire starters made right here in the USA, go to MinutemanStove.com. That's MinutemanStove.com.
Hi, this is Don Ecker, and you are tuned into the Paracast. Let me tell you what, you're going to hear stuff here that you probably won't hear anywhere else. Hear that, George Snorri?
I raised this, so maybe I'll just do it because we have one segment left with you, Gary. It's just been moving so quickly. And that is, this another story. You're writing about a lot of stuff here, as we are with our show and what I write and what Chris writes and what we talk about here, that is way off the radar from the media, what people are being told. Yeah. And so we have someone like a Colin Wilson who has this fascinating life, writing sci-fi, writing crime, writing about philosophy, all sorts of things that also are mostly beyond someone's radar. So in looking for this, how does anyone or can anyone take this kind of material and break through? I mean, obviously, you had to be involved to some degree with what the popular media might want because of your history in rock and roll. But how does that get done with books like this, or can it?
Well, I think there's a big readership out there. I mean, Wilson himself in his day had a big readership, but, other people doing other work along the same lines are out there in different ways, like Graham Hancock, let's say, or Whitley Strieber. I mean, these are more focused kinds of things on particular topics, ancient civilizations or sort of the abduction experience.
Well, of course, with UFO abductions, they get to be on the simple level. Okay, aliens come here, they take us aboard, do some silly physical examinations, and they send us aloft. And the same thing with UFO sightings. Okay, there's a spaceship. That's it. Ghosts? Yeah, spirits of the dead. It's your dead grandmother wanted to come back and tell you that the secret gold locket's in the safe.
Yeah. Well, I tell you, the real thing is called esoteric. Esoteric means the inner. It's not the surface. It's not the outer covering of things. It's the inner content. It's the kernel. It's not the shell.
But isn't that something we need to understand to better realize what life is all about?
I think you're absolutely right. And I think it's true that more people today have some sense of that, let's say. I said there was this occult revival in the 1960s that was caught up with lots of other things, the sexual revolution, the psychedelic revolution, social revolutions, and all that. At that point, it was part of this big thing that was happening. And then it kind of settled. The revolution didn't really happen. Atlantis didn't really rise. And so, we got into the gritty 70s, but there was an underlying sensibility that was established, and I think it's grown. It has its own problems. The New Age has its own problems. It's too simplistic. It doesn't think. It's too uncritical. There's too many wacky things that it just accepts, without thinking about it. But I think it suggests that there's an underlying hunger for this other kind of thing. And yes, most of the stuff about what we've been talking about now, when it shows up on television, it's the most simplistic, dumbed-down kind of version. I mean, I've done a few of these documentaries, and the idea is, yes, it's not really well-researched, and it's not really, insightful, but you're on TV, kid, and you'll get lots of people, hearing what you got to say about it. And so you do a few of those, and you realize, well, actually, in many ways, you're not really helping your own cause because you're just kind of providing content for these other guys, that in the end, they're going to say the same thing, and it's the thing that you don't want to say. You want to say the opposite. You got to have faith. You got to hope that there's other people like you out there, And then gradually, there'll be an undercurrent. There'll be a kind of osmosis effect where these deeper understandings will spread. They'll spread by word of mouth. They'll spread by programs like this, like what we're doing now, and other interviews I do, and other programs and other people who do these interviews. I think there's a hunger for this kind of thing, but you're not going to see immediate evidence for it. Just like you're not going to see a big neon sign come up over the horizon and say, okay, New Age starts now. Age of Aquarius starts now. It's nothing like that. This is something I'm actually going to be writing about. I've been asked to do an article about this kind of thing. In my books, I often talk about what I call an evolution of consciousness. It means that over history, our basic kind of the form, the shape of our consciousness has changed over time. Does that mean that things are getting better? No, I don't think it automatically does. I think consciousness can shift and change during the worst possible crises. And I think that's what we're heading into now or are in, or have been in, for the last few decades. It can decimate everything that's around it at the time.
Yeah, hopefully at the very least it'll shake some people out of their waking coma and wake some folks up because...
Absolutely. And before November 8th.
We got to watch this very carefully because talking about politically correct, Gary, I don't know how often you've listened to the Paracast, but when we get into anything about politics more than just a couple of surface details, it is so polarized there, you can't really have a legitimate discussion. Like we have one listener who wrote and says, don't do that, and then said we shouldn't even keep any money that's generated by the show. We should just have entry-level jobs. We're not allowed to touch that money. So I don't know. There's a lot of wackiness out there.
Well, it's the same thing here in the UK. It's got very polarized recently because of the whole Brexit thing.
Sure. Yeah.
Even the EU. And there's an incredible sense of nationalism here now. And there's an incredible sense of everything has to be British and all that kind of thing. And I'm nothing against things being British, but it's a real, I don't know how to say it. A lot of people I know that are Europeans that are from Europe, they've been here for a long time, they're going back because they really feel the atmosphere here is very inimical, to them. And sadly, in some places, this whole thing is unleashed a really horrible kind of xenophobia and jingoism and all that. So I think it's very scary times, in many ways, Rudolf Steiner, quoting from the Book of Revelations, he talked about the coming war of all against all. And I sometimes wonder if that's, what we're kind of drifting into. Look at Syria. Who's shooting rockets at who?
Right. Just to give you an example of the indigenous culture of the Americas, the Hopi who've been here for tens of thousands of years. Grandfather Martin, who was the holder of the official, prophecy, Fire Clan prophecy tablets, when he saw one of the Hopi purple flowers coming up through a snow bank during a blizzard, he interpreted that as being fulfillment of one of the prophecies and probably the most harrowing of the prophecies, the beginning of the War of the Gourd of Ashes. And he did a press conference with the governor of New Mexico and said within 6-8 months, the final conflict will start. And that's when 6 months later, we went into Kuwait to kick Hussein out of Kuwait in Desert Storm. Yep. And up to his death, he said, yeah, that's it. That's the war. That's the biggie.
Yeah, well, I hope everybody is wrong about this. One of my concerns was because I was very, very privileged in my life. I didn't have to go to Vietnam. My father was in World War II. I didn't have to get drafted. I didn't have to go anywhere. I didn't have to do anything. None of that really impinged on my life. But I did start to think, well, actually, when the excrement hits the air conditioner, it's going to be when I'm in my 70s or something like that, or my late 60s, when I'm going to be kind of too old and feeble to actually kind of deal with the fallout. I hope everybody's wrong.
I resemble that remark because, Gary, I am, as most listeners know, older than you are. We have to end it here because the clock sends me a little message. And it's kind of like a Taptic engine that grabs me by the neck and says, wrap the show up. Gary Lachman, where can we find more of the stuff you do?
Well, you can find my books on Amazon, and you could also find stuff about me at my blog, which is basically garylachman.co.uk. And, put my name into Google, and you'll find lots of stuff up there.
We even find your age and your birth date, by the way. No, if you want that to happen, but we know.
December 24th, 1955.
You're just a mere lad. You can find us on Twitter if you look for the Paracast. Look for a pair of official, don't accept any substitutes, official Paracast fan clubs on Facebook. We also have that second radio show. It's going to be fascinating this week. It's called After the Paracast. And if you want to know more about it, go to plus.theparacast.com to learn about the Paracast Plus. We give you a commercial-free version of this show and other exciting features. The price, as Alfred E. Newman said so many years ago, our price, cheap. It's a monthly subscription price, annual, 5 years, even your lifetime. And I'm going to be here a while, as old as I am. I'm old as the hills. But I'm going to be here for a long, long time. That's what some people tell me. Other people said, you've outlived your usefulness. Just pack it in, man. But I'm not going to do it. You want to learn more about the Paracast Plus? All the information you need, including simple sign-up instructions at plus.theparacast.com. Gary Lachman, I'm very happy to meet you and to meet a famous member of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and a great author. Thanks for joining us on the Paracast.
Entirely my pleasure.
The Paracast, featuring Gene Steinberg and Christopher O'Brien, is a copyrighted presentation of Making the Impossible Incorporated. Tune in next week for a new adventure in The Paracast.